Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. This should be an interesting evening, doing things a little bit differently on different platforms tonight. This is an experiment, but it's always an experiment here. I'm really, really glad you're watching. Really, really glad you can be with us here tonight. Really, really glad you're here. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notifications bell. Let's have our show.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always important to do that. Now, we are streaming tonight. We are on YouTube, we are on Rockfin, and we're on Rumble. This is the first time ever we're on Rumble. We are not on Facebook tonight. Facebook, I've been streaming on Facebook for quite some time, and it hasn't really done us much good. So Facebook is out. We chucked the Zuck. Time to chuck the Zuck. But we are on Rumble, which is a platform that is brave enough to host RT, has gotten a lot of hate in mainstream U.S. media. And we're on the Rockfin, which hosts a lot of anti-imperialist voices on the Rockfin. Convo Couch, others are on there. So, and we're on YouTube. So if you are watching on YouTube, be sure you hit the subscribe button because they are messing with us like crazy in the subscribers. People are being randomly unsubscribed. They've complained to me about it. They've had to resubscribe like 6 times. YouTube does this. You can Google it. You can actually Google this, that they unsubscribe people against their will based on what their algorithm thinks is necessary. Complete bullshit. So make sure that if you are watching on YouTube, that you hit the subscribe button and that you also hit the notifications bell. And if you are watching this on Rumble, welcome. Glad you're here. Go ahead and subscribe on Rumble. And if you're watching this on Rockfin, again, please subscribe. So I'm going to quickly go over, for anyone who might be new, the way we do things on this show. And the way we do things on this program is that I give my opening remarks. That's what I'm doing right now. I give you my thoughts on a few topics that I want to talk about for the evening. While I am doing that, I write down any questions that come through in the form of super chats. Now on YouTube, it's called super chat. On Rockfin, it's called like a tip. And on Rumble, I believe there's another name for it, but it's the same kind of thing, right? It's called like a tip on Rumble as well, or a Rumble Road or whatever. But if you send me a tip or a super chat while I'm giving my opening remarks, I will write it down and I'll put you on the list. And then in the second half of our program, I will answer your super chat or tip question. That's the way it works. So it's called a Rumble rant on Rumble. So if you want to send me a Rumble rant, if you want to send me a tip on Rockfin, or if you want to send me a super chat, that is what you need to do if you want me to answer your question in the second half of our show. So make the second half of our show interesting. Send me a tip on the Rockfin. Send me a Rumble rant on the Rumble. Or you can also just send me a super chat on YouTube. That is the way that we do the second half of the show. So that's the way we do it. As I go along with my opening remarks, I will be writing down, or rather typing down, your super chats, tips, and Rumble rants, your questions that you have for the second half of the show. And I will then spend the second half of our show answering your questions. That's the way we will do it here on this show. So buckle in. It's going to be fun. I'm glad to be here with all of you. It is almost the end of July. We're nearing the beginning of August. So I guess I'll just start talking now. And I'll be writing down super chats, rumble rants, tips as they come in. So, folks, friends, comrades, haters, lurkers, supporters, allies, sympathizers, interested viewers, I'm really happy that you're watching this right now. I just have to tell you that with my utmost sincerity. The fact that you are here right now means the world to me. It means the world to me but I must continue to remind myself that the internet is not real. The internet is not real. This is merely a means of communication. And while it means the world to me that you all are watching, liking this, sharing this, tweeting this out, at the end of the day, well, it means a lot to me. Gives me hope, makes me feel reassured in what I'm doing. Makes me optimistic, makes me proud of what I'm doing. At the end of the day, what matters to me is not that you watch this and you sit here and listen to what I have to say. What matters to me is what you do about it. That's what matters to me. What really matters. Writing down the first super chat. What matters to me is what this program inspires you to do. That is what matters to me. What matters to me is what happens off the internet, not on the internet. That's what matters to me. Because I got to tell you, a lot of what happens on the internet is bullshit. It's bullshit. There's just a lot of bullshit that happens on the internet. A lot of it. A lot of what goes on the internet is just a lot of bullshit. And I'm not here to get you wrapped up in bullshit. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to connect you to something real. I am here to connect you to something real. I like that first super chat question that came in. I like it because it's about something real. So I got to tell you, it's a hot summer here in New York City. New York City can be a very hot place in the summertime. A lot of concrete here, brick walls, concrete pavement. It's like an oven in New York City. Walked through my neighborhood today. I just came back to the conclusion that I keep coming back to. This country urgently needs a movement. This country urgently needs a movement. Not a hashtag. Not a social media trend. Not wokeism. Not anti-wokeism. This country needs a movement. Urgently. This country urgently needs a movement. And nothing on the internet, nothing intellectual, nothing woke, nothing anti-woke, nothing will be able to do what a movement can do. And I saw your tip, Daniel. I'm cutting and pasting it. You're on the list about artificial intelligence. Daniel just sent a tip via the Rockfin, so I put it down. Thank you, Daniel. And you're on the list. Don't worry. Thank you. I wish I could show it on the screen, but I can't. But you're on the list, Daniel. This country needs a movement. Urgently needs a movement. And the reason we need a movement is because the country is falling apart. The roads are crumbling. They're unpaving the roads in 27 different states. Our railroads are falling apart and derailing. Our power plants are exploding and malfunctioning. A couple of years ago, the power grid in Texas collapsed. The power station here in Manhattan exploded a little while back. The reason we need a movement is because we're spiritually, culturally, politically coming apart as well. It's getting crazier every day. It's getting more nuts every day. And on top of that, we need a movement because the danger of a new world war is very, very, very real. We're facing the danger of a new world war. The country is falling apart economically. Wages are dropping. Living conditions are getting worse. The country is falling apart economically. It's pulling apart politically, socially, culturally, spiritually. And we're about to possibly have some kind of drastic confrontation. I don't know if you've seen the latest revelations from Seymour Hersh about the war in Ukraine and the details there. I might get into that later, but we urgently need a movement. We need a movement that is pro-growth, in favor of rebuilding this country, improving living standards. We need a movement that is anti-war and doesn't want to march us into a thermonuclear war or an all-out global confrontation with Russia, China, People's Korea, and all the other anti-imperialist countries. We urgently need a movement that rejects the low-wage police state. We need a movement urgently. We urgently need a movement, a real mass awakening of the population. And the internet is rigged. The internet is completely rigged. The internet is completely bankrupt, and nothing online is going to cut it. We need a movement, a real in real life mass awakening of the population. There's no way around it. We need a movement. Social media is rigged. We need people knocking on doors. We need people handing out leaflets on the street. We need people protesting. Peace with Russia, peace with China, hands off People's Korea, hands off Iran, hands off Venezuela. No police state. Stop the attacks on our civil liberties. We need a movement. We need people to do what Ramsey Clark, my former boss, I used to work for Ramsey Clark at the International Action Center. What did he do his whole life? He had been the U.S. Attorney General. He saw how ugly things were on the inside. He was fired by Richard Nixon, so he immediately went into anti-imperialist organizing. He organized protests against the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the Gulf War. He organized protests in the streets for civil liberties. He was a lawyer in the courtroom. He defended those who were on trial. He dedicated himself to exposing crimes against working people, whether it was the crimes, at Waco against the religious folks who were blown up by the federal government at Waco, or the crime of framing Lyndon LaRouche and sending him to prison, or the crime of voter suppression, or the crime of the imprisonment and framing up of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Ramsey Clark dedicated himself to building a movement, and he had been the U.S. Attorney General. And as the U.S. Attorney General, he had been a supporter of civil rights. He'd been a huge admirer of John F. Kennedy. And from within the Lyndon Johnson administration, he saw how important mass movements can be. How much the Johnson administration was afraid of the mass movement to end the Vietnam War. How much they were afraid of the civil rights movement. He tried to restrain the FBI. He's on tape. I've got some of my videos. I have recordings of Ramsey Clark talking about J. Edgar Hoover and his attempts to restrain the FBI, stop them from wiretapping Stokely Carmichael and black revolutionaries. Ramsey Clark, who had been in the circles of power, his father was a U.S. Attorney General. He was the U.S. Attorney General under Lyndon Johnson. He saw from within the circles of power how important mass movements are. And if there's ever been a time in the United States where we need a mass movement, a real mass movement, it's now. We need a movement urgently. Urgently, we need a movement. We need an awakening of the population to say Russia is not our enemy. China is not our enemy. To say hands off our freedom of speech. To say hands off our privacy. To say that Twitter has no justification whatsoever for letting the FBI decide what goes viral and what doesn't. The FBI has no business calling up the New York Post or calling up Mark Zuckerberg and telling them what stories they're allowed to air. That the Uhuru movement, a group of black revolutionaries that are facing 10 years in prison just for engaging in anti-war activism, speaking at conferences in Russia, the charges against them must be dropped immediately. And the witch hunting of dissidents in the United States, the criminalization of dissent must end immediately. That the overreach by our government, the combined criminal conspiracy that goes from Washington, D.C., all the way over to Silicon Valley, all the way up to Wall Street, a sinister triangle of evil that has gripped this country and is leading us off a cliff. This conspiracy must be repudiated by the American people. We need a movement. We need a movement more than ever right now. And we don't have one. In the past, I've raised the slogan, out of the movement to the masses, referring to the left bubble, referring to the synthetic left. But at this point, the synthetic left isn't even a movement. There was a lot of protesting around George Floyd when they were trying to get Donald Trump out of office. There was a lot of anti-Trump protesting, but that isn't even a movement. That's a hashtag. That's a social media trend. It's CNN manipulation of politics. That's not even a movement. You can't even call it a movement, the synthetic left. And it's done. And it's over. We need a movement urgently in America right now. We need people to take history into their own hands. We need people doing activism. August 6th, there's going to be a very important rally and protest at the United Nations. Humanity for Peace. You can go to their website. I'll drop the website in the chat. Humanityforpeace.net. A lot of different groups are going to be there. Libertarians, Libertarian Party, the Schiller Institute, various communist groups, a church. One of the churches has endorsed Archangels for Liberty, a Christian group. We need a movement. August 6th, great. Humanity for Peace, great. Protest on the anniversary of Hiroshima, saying no more Hiroshimas, no more nuclear war. Great. We need a movement, and that's a step in the right direction. August 6th, Humanity for Peace. That's a great start, but it's not enough. We need a movement. All right, if you're watching this right now, I love you. I love you because of the fact that everything in the world has been done to prevent you from watching this. If you Google me, you Google my name, everything in the world has been done to convince you not to listen to a word that I have to say, to convince you that I am the incarnation of Satan, that I am the most evil thing that has ever existed. Did you know? I mean, Google my name. It comes up. They accuse me of every evil deed under the sun. And if that doesn't tell you how scared they are of a movement, I don't know what to tell you. All right? I mean, the fact that you're watching this right now means that you're somebody who's intelligent enough and curious enough and somehow came in contact with me somehow enough to look past whatever the smears and the lies and the rumors are to come along. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. I am so glad you're here. But there's not enough of us. And we're just on the internet. And the internet is a trap. It's a dead end and it's a trap. The internet is a dead end and a trap. That's what it is. The internet is a dead end and a trap. If all you ever do is listen to me talk, we ain't going nowhere. We need a movement. We need a movement. And you think, I know that saying that is not going to get me a boost online. This isn't what people want to hear. People want to hear cynical humor. People want to be told that, that somebody they don't like is a big doofus. People want to be reinforced in what they already believe. People want to feel good about themselves. Nobody wants to be told that you need to do something. No one wants to feel obligated to do something that they're not already doing. So I'm not winning any points with you by talking the way that I am right now. And that's how you can tell that I'm telling you the truth. I'm not telling you what you want to hear right now. I'm telling you what you need to hear right now. We need a movement. And if people like you don't take responsibility for the future of this country, for the future of your community, for the future of your neighborhood, and for the future of your planet, we are screwed. We need a movement. We need a movement. I mean, there's no way around it. We urgently need a movement. We need a movement right now. We need a movement urgently. We urgently need a movement. There's no way around it. There's no way. There's no other way. There is no other way. There is no other way. We need a movement. And I'm glad, Jamie. You can join the Center for Political Innovation. We're building a movement. We're going to be in the streets August 6th. We got a campaign in Portland coming up. We're still trying to figure out the details of that, talking to different people about different ideas and what's possible. Peter Coffin is currently making a documentary of our last event, the rally and then evening event that we had, in Manhattan. We're doing our best. We're doing what we can with our little resources, the little resources we have, and the low number of members that we have, just about 105, 106 members. We are doing the best we can, but it's not enough, and it's never enough. We need a movement. We urgently need a movement. We need a movement. And I'm going to spend the rest of my opening remarks tonight, not sure how long I'll go. I'm going to start telling you about movements. I am going to tell you about movements. And I'm going to try to explain to you why movements are important. I'm going to give you different examples of why movements are important, why movements matter, what we can learn from movements. I'm going to do it in ways that probably would surprise you. I am going to tell you about a man who led one of the biggest movements history has ever seen. And if you want to talk about somebody who changed the world, this man changed the world. And if you want to talk about somebody who's been canceled and smeared, nobody has been smeared and canceled as badly as this man has. But I don't think there's anybody. I mean, there's a few people in history, maybe, but he's probably one of the people who had the greatest impact on world history. There are a few people in the 20th century who had anywhere near the impact that this man had. And that man is Stalin. Joseph Stalin. When people hear the name Joseph Stalin, they think, okay, wasn't he like the dictator of the Soviet Union during World War II? You have no idea. The Soviet Union was the largest country in the world in terms of geography. Huge. Look at a map. Look at all the territory that the Soviet Union included. Russia, Siberia, Ukraine. Look at a map. Central Asian countries. Kazakhstan. Look at a map. That whole area got electricity because of Stalin. That whole area was electrified because of Joseph Stalin. That whole area got running water, modern plumbing, because of Stalin. When that country was invaded, 1 out of 7 people was killed. 27 million people were killed. And Stalin was the leader who presided over a country facing horrors that we can't even imagine. The horrors of Nazi invasion. And he held that country together so firmly that they were able to withstand the Nazi war machine and push it backward. And then, in the aftermath of that, When the USA had the atomic bomb, they were able to develop their own atomic bomb. And shortly after Stalin's death, they launched the first satellite into orbit. Joseph Stalin led a mass movement that shook the world. It made the lives of millions and millions and millions of people better. He wiped out illiteracy in the former Soviet Union. He raised millions of people out of poverty. He led the people of the Soviet Union to make horrendous sacrifices to defeat the Nazi menace, the menace of fascism. And you, if you're living in the United States, you have directly benefited from what Stalin did. Believe it or not, if you live in America, if it wasn't for Stalin, your life would be a lot worse. There have been strikes in American history, protest movements for a long time. You know, the struggle for the 8-hour day, demanding an 8-hour workday, that started before the American Revolution. People in America, working class people on the job, have been protesting and organizing for years. The biggest strike wave in American history was in, I believe, the 1870s. It was the railroad workers' strike, and it lost miserably. The railroad workers didn't win anything. All that we got out of it was the national armory system. They built armories all over the country so they could put down strikes in the future. There's been strikes and labor struggles all throughout American history. But when was the labor movement winning the most? When did we see the biggest gains for workers on the job in America? The 1930s. 1934, the summer of 1934, the working class of this country was in revolt. In San Francisco, the dock workers went on strike. In Minneapolis, the Teamsters, the truck drivers went on strike. And in Toledo, Ohio, the auto light workers went on strike. In most of the South, the sharecroppers went on strike. A state of emergency was even declared in South Carolina. The summer of 1934 was not that different than most of U.S. history. There was an uptick in labor struggles. There was more strikes and protests going on because the conditions of the Great Depression had become unbearable. But the reason that the following year, 1935, after the summer of 1934, after the big explosion of working class struggles, after the strike wave of 1934, the reason that Roosevelt turned around and passed the Wagner Act and made it a federal law that workers have the right to join a labor union. The reason that Roosevelt's administration started hiring millions of unemployed people and giving them jobs, putting them to work building things. The reason for that was because that strike wave, 1934, it came in the context of the Soviet Union existing. It came in the context of there being a section of the world that had broken out of the capitalist economy. And while the United States was having a Great Depression, the Soviet Union was rapidly building itself up and industrializing. And there was something called the Communist International, led by the Soviet Union, that was organizing those strikes. The dock workers of San Francisco, the auto light workers, the sharecroppers. They were organized by communists who were looking to the Soviet Union for inspiration. And it was in the context of those global situations, the rise of socialism around the world, that the ruling class saw how dangerous the rising working class movement in America was, and it began granting concessions. A couple years later, after the sit-down strike wave of 1937, Roosevelt created the 8-hour workday with the Fair Labor Standards Act A minimum wage was created, and an 8-hour workday was created. And unemployment insurance was created. All of this was created in the 1930s, not because there were strikes going on. That was part of it. But there had been strikes before. The rail workers' strikes of the 1800s were much bigger. There were other strikes and labor struggles that were much bigger. But in the context of the global capitalist economy crashing and the Soviet Union rising to become an industrial superpower, raising millions of people up from poverty, showing the world what socialism can do as an economic system, building the world's largest hydroelectrical power plants, having amazing achievements in the arts and the sciences. In that context, the ruling class saw the strike wave of 1934, and they got scared. And that was the beginning of the concessions and reforms that were won. That's important to recognize. People don't understand this. Stalin led a mass movement. I'm going to tell you about who Stalin was, in case you didn't know who he was. No one knows anything about Stalin. I'll tell you who Stalin was. Stalin was from a very poor background. He was from a small village in Georgia, the country of Georgia. His mother had had many miscarriages before she was born, before Stalin was born. She made a promise to God, and if she could have a son, she would make that son become a priest. So when Stalin was born, Stalin's mother decided that she was going to make Joseph Stalin a priest. And so she went around and she raised money and she did everything she could to send her boy to seminary school. And Stalin's father was a bootmaker. He was an alcoholic. Beat up his mother, beat up Stalin quite a bit. Stalin's father moved out of the household, didn't live with them. And every so often, Stalin's father would come and take his son away, try to teach his son to be a bootmaker. And then Stalin's mother would come and take him back. He spent his childhood between two parental households, one belonging to his drunken father, who was a bootmaker, and the other belonging to his mother, who was a fanatically religious woman who was determined to have him become a priest. You can imagine what that young man went through. But regardless, he ended up as a teenager in seminary school, learning to become a Russian Orthodox priest. And when Stalin was in seminary school, we started to see that he was an organizer. He was a natural-born organizer. In seminary school, they had a rule that one could only read religious books. So Stalin went to the local village, went to the book dealership, bookshop, made an arrangement, and he started selling underground literature, smuggling forbidden books at seminary school and making money doing it. He ran a book smuggling ring at the seminary school. He was constantly getting in trouble for running this underground book smuggling ring. He was quite popular. And it was amazing that he was quite popular because he was not Russian. Most of the people attending this school were Russian, but he was from Georgia. And they made fun of him for his accent. He was thought to be inferior because he was from a different nationality, an oppressed nationality. He was Georgian, not Russian. But regardless, even though they didn't quite trust him because of his nationality, because of his background, Stalin became very popular at seminary school. He ran the underground book smuggling ring. He got in trouble quite a bit, had a discipline problem, was considered to be a rebel child, young man of rebellion. One way or another, he eventually got chucked out of shucked out of seminary school, but he knew how to read and write. And that put him ahead of a lot of people. Most people from little towns like Stalin's, little tiny Georgian villages, they didn't know how to read and write. But Stalin did know how to read and write. And he was a good writer too. And he wrote poetry. And he wrote songs. He wrote his own songs. He wrote his own poetry. He wrote beautiful, beautiful stuff. There's a poem by Stalin. This is one of Stalin's poems that he wrote when he was a teenager. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find the poem. Let me see if I can find the poem. Yeah, here we go. Here's one of Stalin's poems that he wrote when he was a young man. Here we go. He wanders like a shadow from door to door through the world, holding in his dark hands the oak panduri and playing it tenderly. Now, a panduri is an instrument, right? It's a three-stringed lute, right? So keep that in mind as I'm reading this. This is one of Stalin's poems from when he was a teenager. I'll start again. It's about this three-stringed Russian instrument. It's like a guitar, but it's a lute. It has three strings. He wanders like a shadow from door to door through the world, holding in his hands the oak panduri and playing it tenderly. In the sounds so full of dreams as the rays of the sun, you can hear pure truth and divine love. Many stony, frozen hearts started beating then. Many blinded, frozen minds turned to the light again. But instead of gratitude for the sounds as sweet as love, the mob brought the anchorite. The cup is full of poison, and they told him, drink it and be damned. To fulfill your destiny, we do not need your truth, nor your heavenly voice. It's a beautiful poem. It's an absolutely beautiful poem that Stalin wrote. Stalin wrote this poem. He wrote it, and he wrote this poem in December of 1895. So what year was Stalin born? He was born in 1878. So he would have, right? Doing the math here. How old was Stalin when he wrote that poem? He was 17 years old. That's a poem that Stalin wrote when he was 17 years old. It's about being frustrated with the masses of people. People who can't appreciate truth and beauty. Right? The final line about the cup is full of poison and they told him to drink it. That's about Socrates, right? That's Socrates being forced to drink hemlock. But it's interesting about how Stalin in this poem, he conflates truth and beauty. They walk hand in hand, right? And he equates it with music. Music. Got it. He equates it with music, right? He writes, in the sounds so full of dreams as the rays of the sun, you can hear pure truth and divine love, right? He sees music and truth and beauty and love all tied in together. He sees himself as this musician walking around singing for the people to give them this truth, this divine love, and the people reject him. And this is 17-year-old Stalin writes this beautiful poem. Read it one more time, just one more time, because it's so beautiful. Such a beautiful piece of poetry. I think many of us can probably relate to it. You can tell he was an organizer. Even at this age of 17 years old, Stalin was an organizer. He was an organizer. This is the cry of an organizer who has the truth about oppression, has the truth about people suffering, and the people don't want to hear it. One more time. He wanders like a shadow from door to door through the world, holding in his hands the oak panduri and playing it tenderly. In the sounds so full of dreams as the rays of the sun, you can hear pure truth and divine love. And many stony, frozen hearts started beating then. And many blinded, frozen minds turned to the light again. But instead of gratitude, the sounds as sweet as love, the mob brought to the anchorite the cup is full of poison. They told him, drink it and be damned to fulfill your destiny. We don't need your truth, nor your heavenly voice. An amazing piece of writing. Utterly amazing piece of writing. He's talking about Jesus Christ. He's talking about the crucifixion. He was in seminary school. He's drawing a parallel between the persecution of Jesus Christ and the persecution of Socrates. He's drawing a parallel between the musician who illuminates people with his music, and the teacher, the philosopher who educates people, and the organizer who makes people aware of their material interests. It's a beautiful piece of writing. That's Stalin. That is Stalin. And that Stalin was a dynamic organizer, an absolutely dynamic, brilliant political organizer. The Bolshevik Party that he joined, led by Vladimir Lenin, it had two newspapers. The first newspaper was an illegal underground magazine called Spark or Iskra. And it was a theoretical journal with articles by Lenin and others explaining their theories of imperialism, explaining dialectical and historical materialism. Iskra was the propaganda journal. It was only for the advanced. The Bolsheviks, you have to understand, Lenin developed his concept of the party of new type. Most of the Marxist organizations of Europe wanted everybody to join. They wanted as many members as they could possibly have, so they watered down the revolutionary content. They watered it down because they wanted as many members as they could possibly have. Lenin said, we're going to build a party of a new type. And this party of new type that we're going to build it's not for everybody. It's only for those who will give the whole of their lives to become professional revolutionaries. It's not a mass party. It's a vanguard party. It's a party of tribunes of the people. and this party of new type will engage in two types of activity. One, it will engage in propaganda. And that's teaching people the revolutionary science of Marxism. But it'll only propagate to the advanced. Propaganda is not for everybody. Propaganda is only for the advanced. It's for the leaders among the population, the agitators, the community leaders, the organizers. You propagate to them. You teach them the science of Marxism. But for the masses, you have agitation. And agitation is raising awareness about the injustice that exists, raising awareness about how unfair and unjust the world is, and urging the people to stand up, making them aware of the injustice that exists, and showing them how intolerable their conditions is, stirring them up for a greater confrontation with the power structure. That is what agitation is. You agitate the masses. You propagate to the advance. Iskra, Spark, was the propaganda newspaper. It was only for the advanced. Lenin and Bukharin and Zinoviev and Kamenev, people like that wrote for Iskra. But Stalin was the editor of the Pravda. Pravda means truth. And the Truth was the daily newspaper. It came out every day, that was distributed all over the cities of Russia. And it was not propaganda, it was agitation. Stalin was the editor of the agitational daily newspaper, the Pravda, that was distributed all over the country. And most of the articles in the Pravda were what they called worker correspondence. It was letters. They would get letters from people, anonymous letters from people about the conditions in their factories, the conditions in their workplace, the conditions in their villages if they were peasants. They would get anonymous letters from people. And Stalin would compile these anonymous letters into a big newspaper that was distributed every day. And they would hand it out to the workers in the factory. And most of the working people at that time couldn't read and write. So usually there'd only be one worker who could read. And as other workers were working, that worker would read the Pravda, read it out loud to his coworkers. Read the anonymous workers' correspondence, the letters about what conditions were like on the job, about what people were struggling with, how the price of food was getting too high. I mean, this Stalin was writing a paper that was read by everybody. If you read the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, they talk about the workers' correspondence and how important the Pravda newspaper was. This was a newspaper that everyone just couldn't wait to get their hands on, because it talked about what real life was like for real people. It talked about real injustices. The Pravda, the agitational daily newspaper, Stalin put that out every day. He put out the Pravda newspaper, a mass agitational publication, urging the people to see how unfair and unjust things were, to support workers when they were out on strike, to oppose World War I and not die in a boss's war for boss's profits. Right? Stalin was the editor of the Pravda newspaper. Stalin was a mass organizer. Stalin was a movement guy. And if you read Stalin's writings, I recently just I enjoyed rereading one of Stalin's books. Right? A couple of Stalin's books I've been enjoying, but there's two of Stalin's books I've been rereading. I've been reading Anarchism or Socialism by Stalin. This is Stalin explaining why you should become a Marxist and not an anarchist. And it is written in the most clear, coherent language. It sounds nothing like Slavoj Žižek. Sounds nothing like that what is that purity fetish book written by Midwest Marx that's all esoteric and has all kinds of, weird quotes from, this isn't an academic book. This is written so people will read it. This is not written to get an A+ from your professor. It's not written in that academic highfalutin tone. He wrote this because he wanted people to digest it and read it and understand it. It's beautifully written. And he assumes that you know nothing. He assumes you don't know anything about Marxism, and that's fine because he's here to teach it to you. This is written for people to read. It's not written to impress anybody. It's not written to show off how big your intellectual Marxist dick is. It's written to teach people because Stalin was a teacher. And this other book, this is literally lectures that Stalin gave. After the Russian Revolution, they set up a school in Moscow to teach communism to people around the world. And so Stalin was a lecturer at the communist school in Moscow. And so he gave a series of lectures called The Foundations of Leninism. And this is a compilation of lectures that Stalin gave on the teachings of Vladimir Lenin. And again, it's written very clearly and very coherently. It's written for the purpose of getting people to actually understand the concepts, not to wave one's, not to impress anybody, not to be, look what a great intellectual I am. Stalin didn't care about that. He was an organizer. He was a mass organizer. And he wrote like an organizer, not like an academic. And then, you really want to get into Stalin? These are the articles that Stalin wrote against Trotsky. And if you read what Stalin wrote against Leon Trotsky, what comes across so overwhelmingly in the writing is that Stalin knew the people. He knew the people, and Trotsky did not. Stalin knew the people of the Soviet Union, Russia, the surrounding countries. He knew them like the back of his hand. He knew them like the back of his hand. He had a deep spiritual connection with the people. Trotsky did not have a deep spiritual connection with the people. Trotsky hated the peasantry. Trotsky believed in permanent revolution. And if you read Stalin's writing about his disagreements with Trotsky, this comes overwhelmingly, it comes across overwhelmingly. This is what he writes. Trotsky's arguing that they'll expand into the ranks. They'll expand the military, that they'll militarize the economy. And this is what Stalin writes. He says, a group of party workers headed by Trotsky, intoxicated by the success achieved by military methods in the army, supposes that those methods can and must be adopted among the workers and in the trade unions in order to achieve similar successes in strengthening the unions and reviving industry. But this group forgets that the army and the working class are two different spheres, that a method that is suitable for the army may prove unsuitable, harmful for the working class and for the trade unions. The army is not a homogeneous mass. It consists of two main social groups, the peasants and the workers, the former being several times more numerous than the latter. In urging the necessity of employing chiefly methods of coercion in the army, the Eighth Party Congress based itself on the fact that our army consists mainly of peasants, and the peasants will not go to fight for socialism, that they can and must be compelled to fight for socialism by employing methods of coercion. This explains the rise of purely military methods in the system of commissars and revolutionary tribunals. In the contrast to the army, the working class is homogeneous. Its economic position disposes it towards socialism. It is easily influenced by communist agitation. It voluntarily organizes in trade unions. And as a consequence of all of this, it constitutes the foundation, the salt of the earth. He's quoting the Bible, the salt of the earth of the Soviet state. It's not surprising, therefore, that the practical work of our industrial unions has been based chiefly on persuasion. And this explains the rise of purely trade union methods as an explanation, mass propaganda, encouragement of initiative, and independent activity of the mass of workers, election of officials, and so forth. You read this, Stalin knew the people. Trotsky did not know the people. He talks of the working class of Russia being the salt of the earth. The salt of the earth. And where does the term salt of the earth come from? Salt of the earth. Where does that come from? Google doesn't want me to know. But here we go. Comes from the Bible, Matthew chapter 5:13. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And neither do people put a lamp and put it under a bowl, but instead they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Stalin says that the working class of Russia are the salt of the earth. And I just read you his poem that he wrote, where he talked about light and music. Everything you've been told about Stalin is a lie, an exaggeration, a misconception. And you have to wonder, the man has been dead for so long. Why are they so determined to make you hate Stalin? Lenin is considered somewhat okay. You're allowed to like Lenin. You're allowed to say, well, Lenin was had good ideals, but Stalin ruined it all. Thank you. Writing it down. You're allowed to like Stalin. You're allowed to like Lenin. You're not allowed to like Stalin. You're allowed to like Marx. You're not allowed to like Stalin. Stalin did something utterly amazing. The rest of the planet was having a Great Depression. And the Soviet Union was rising up from nothing. It was industrializing rapidly, building the world's greatest power plants. It was producing the best music the world had ever heard, Shostakovich. They had symphonies where ordinary working people were going and filling up the auditoriums to hear the symphonies. They were producing the greatest films that had ever been made before. Sergei Eisenstein films like the Battleship Potemkin, films like Ivan the Terrible. They were making the best films in the world. They had athletes and gymnasts that were doing moves that had never been done before. You know, I mean, it was utterly, utterly amazing what Stalin was doing. What Stalin was doing had never been done before, and it was amazing. It was utterly amazing. The country had had no steel industry before. It was now the largest steel industry in the world. The country barely had any oil production to speak of, just a few oil fields in Azerbaijan. Suddenly it was producing more oil. It was a mass oil producing country. The Koch brothers, their father, Fred Koch, was a chemist in America who'd been put out of business because he developed a method of thermal cracking that was more effective than, making gasoline, turning petroleum oil into gasoline. And, they hired Fred Koch, the Koch brothers' father, and they put him to work in the Soviet Union. They built the Moscow subway system, which is beautiful. They wiped out illiteracy. They built modern universities. Women were getting degrees in electrical engineering. Women were rising up the ranks of the military. You have no idea what Stalin achieved. You have absolutely no idea what Stalin achieved. When they try to tell you communism failed everywhere that's ever been tried, they're telling you that because they don't want you to see what Stalin did. What Stalin did was unprecedented by history. They'd always told us you can't have socialism. It won't work. Human nature. And it was working. And the whole world was in awe of what was being achieved in the Soviet Union. The rest of the planet was having the Great Depression. Stalin warned the world about the dangers of fascism. 1935, he reoriented the global communist movement to build a united front, a popular front against fascism. Before, they'd been focused on fighting the Social Democrats. But when Hitler came to power in Germany, Stalin said, we got to change our tactics. And they flipped. In the early 1920s, or in the early 1930s, Stalin wrote a lot about the need to break with the Social Democrats, to expose the Social Democrats as social fascists. Go and read Stalin's interview with H.G. Wells, one of the most amazing interviews. It's a dynamic interview where H.G. Wells and Stalin, they just go at it. And this great British intellectual, the guy who wrote The Time Machine, this famous writer, H.G. Wells, Stalin goes at it with H.G. Wells, argues with him about politics. And in the early 1930s, Stalin was focused on exposing the Social Democrats. But then, after Hitler came to power, Stalin flips the tactics, flips them around. He says, now we got to be the most effective leaders of a united front against the fascists. And they did it. And in Britain, they shut down the fascist Oswald Mosley at the Battle of Cable Street. A Nazi sympathizer, Oswald Mosley, was going to have a march through a Jewish neighborhood. And so the communists, they organized thousands, tens of thousands of people to come and protect the Jewish neighborhood, to say, you shall not pass. Thousands and thousands of people piled into Cable Street. And they said, you shall not pass, you shall not pass, you shall not pass. And they blocked the march. It's a huge rebellion, the Battle of Cable Street. In Spain, when the Spanish government was facing an uprising by fascists, Franco, thousands of people from all over the world went to Spain to fight fascism because Stalin called them. 5,000 Americans went to Spain and fought against Franco because Stalin said we have to fight fascism. The Americans who went to Spain, they were called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And this is close to me. When I was in high school, You know, I'm from a little town in Ohio called Orrville, Ohio. That's where I grew up. And I thought it would be interesting to see if there'd ever been a communist in Orrville, Ohio. So I Googled Orrville, Ohio, communist. It's a tiny town. It's like 10,000 people. I figured, what are the chances? I'm getting into communism. I live here. And, Ohio, this little town in Ohio. I wonder if there's ever been a communist here. Well, there was. There was a guy named Carl Geiser. And Carl Geiser had been studying electrical engineering at Cleveland State University in the 1930s. His parents were farmers in Orrville, Ohio. They were farmers in Orrville, Ohio, and he had been studying electrical engineering. He was really good at math, a math whiz. And he'd been studying at Cleveland State University, and he got his degree. But he also joined Students Against War and Fascism, which was a club at Cleveland State University. Students Against War and Fascism was a club led by communists. He was against war. He was against fascism. He joined Students Against War and Fascism. And then he went to the Soviet Union because they were hiring electrical engineers to work in the Soviet Union because they were they were electrifying the whole country. And Carl Geiser, this young man from the very same tiny little town in Ohio that I grew up in, he went to the Soviet Union, this farm boy from Ohio, and he was blown away by what he saw. The whole country was industrializing, raising people out of poverty, building and constructing. He couldn't believe it. In the United States, they had homeless people living in these Hoovervilles, begging for work, riding railroads from city to city, starving. People were literally starving in America during the 1930s. And he went to the Soviet Union, and this poor country was rising up from nothing. And he was blown away by what he saw. And so he said, what can I do when I get back to America? And they said, you got to join the Communist Party. So he came back to America and he joined the Communist Party. And the Communist Party was looking for volunteers to fight in Spain. And Carl Geiser went and fought in Spain. He was a captain in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And he fought in Spain against fascism. He was one of the international brigades that went and fought in Spain against fascism. Carl Geiser, a guy from my little town in Ohio, from my little tiny town in Ohio, went to Spain to fight fascism. And he got captured and taken prisoner. Eventually, he was sent home back to the United States. There were 5,000 Americans who went to Spain to fight fascism because Stalin called them. There would not be a mass movement against racism in this country the way there was if it hadn't been for Stalin. The Communist Party, they declared that black people in America were part of an oppressed nation. They were a colonized people within the borders of the United States. And they called for independence for the Black Belt, the regions of the U.S. South where all the slave plantations were because the soil is so rich, the Black Belt South, right? Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. There's a certain region they call the Black Belt region. And it is the wealthiest soil in America. It's the most fertile soil in America. And the soil is literally black. That's why it's called that. It's not for black people. It's for the black soil. And still to this day, the Black Belt region has the best soil in America. But the people who live there are the poorest people in America. The poorest people. If you go to the Black Belt region of America, I wish you could go there. Wish you could go to the Black Belt. Everyone around the world thinks that America's rich. Everyone, you turn on your TV. You would think that all of America is Central Park in New York City. All of America is Washington Square Park. All of America is Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. Bullshit. Bullshit. Go to the Black Belt. Go to Mississippi. Go to Alabama. Go to Georgia. Go to the Black Belt region of the United States that has the richest soil. There's not one part of this country that has produced more cotton, more peanuts, more tobacco. It is the richest, most fertile soil in America. And the people who live in the Black Belt, the people who live in the Black Belt region are dirt poor and they're hungry. They live in shacks. They live in horrendous conditions still to this day. And it is still, the Black Belt is still majority African American. There's a lot of poor white people in the Black Belt also. It's majority black, but there's still some poor white people there. And the Communist Party of the United States, they said that the Black Belt region and the descendants of slaves in America are an oppressed nation. They're a colony within U.S. borders. They're super exploited. They're super exploited. And so the Communist Party called for independence for the Black Belt. They wanted the Black Belt to secede from America, to break away and become its own country. Independence for the Black Belt. They had a map of the United States of America showing the Black Belt region. I'll show you. I'll show it to you. You got to see this. I'm not making this up. This was their election campaign poster, the Communist Party's election campaign poster from 1932. I'm going to put it on the screen here so you can see. You need to know this history. You need to know this history. This was the Communist Party's election campaign poster, 1932. William Z. Foster and James W. Ford, a black man running for vice president. William Z. Foster, the great labor leader running for president. Equal rights for black people everywhere. Self-determination for the Black Belt. And it has a map of America. Self-determination for the Black Belt. That was their election campaign poster. Now, this region of the United States where black people lived and were being super exploited, the remnants of slavery, self-determination for the Black Belt, equal rights for black people. In 1932, having a poster like this could get you lynched. Right? There was a Communist Party organizer in Alabama. He almost got the death penalty. They sentenced him to death for passing out communist leaflets because under the Jim Crow system, it was a crime to urge black people to rise up. They sentenced him to death. Angelo Herndon, he was sentenced to death. He was on death row. They were going to give him the death penalty for urging black people to rise up, for passing out leaflets. And then the Supreme Court ultimately overturned it. Angelo Herndon. Google Angelo Herndon. This was all because of Stalin. This is why they want you to hate Stalin. This is why they want you to hate Stalin. Read about Angelo Herndon. I'll never forget, in my own little town, the little town I grew up in, I had a history teacher. And he would bring me old articles from the town's newspaper, from my little town in Ohio, Orville, Ohio. He would bring me articles from my little town in Ohio, from the town's newspaper back in the day that he thought might be interesting to me. I'll never forget, one day he brought me an article from the newspaper in my little town from 1951. 1951. And you know what the headline was? The headline was, "Take that, Uncle Joe. Take that, Uncle Joe." Uncle Joe was what they called Stalin. Well, Stalin's nickname, they called him Uncle Joe. And the article was about how a black family in my little town had bought a house for the first time. The first black family in my little town had bought a house. And the article began with a quote from Stalin about how Stalin said that America and the way it treats black people proves that it's not a democracy. And the whole article was saying, well, clearly Stalin's wrong. We just let this black family buy a house. So clearly Stalin's wrong. Take that, Uncle Joe. Take that, Uncle Joe. Racism doesn't exist in our little town. A black family bought a house. Stalin, Stalin doesn't know what he's talking about. That's what the article was. That shows you how important everything the Soviet Union did was to the struggle against racism. Emmett Till was lynched for whistling at a white woman shortly after Stalin died. Young black man, teenager, was visiting his relatives in Mississippi. He was from Chicago, and he whistled at a white woman, allegedly, and he was murdered for it. And they mutilated his body. His body was just horrendously mutilated. They just beat this young man to death, tortured him, threw his body in a river. It was horrendous. So then, the mother wanted the world to see what had been done to her son. So she had an open casket funeral so you could see how this young man was just brutalized. And they photographed the mutilated body of young Emmett Till. I'm not going to show the photograph on here. It's a pretty awful photograph of what was done to this young black man. Well, the Soviet Union, they took that picture and they sent it all over the world to show the world what America is really like, to say what America really is. They humiliated the United States with the photograph of Emmett Till's mutilated body. The Soviet Union sent that all over the world. That's some of that Russian disinformation they're always complaining about. That's some of that Russian propaganda they're always talking about. Showing the world what America is really like. Showing the world. It was amazing what the Soviet Union did. And if you think that this didn't have anything to do with the civil rights movement, you think this had nothing to do with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you're wrong. You are absolutely wrong. You can thank Stalin for the civil rights movement in America. You can thank Stalin for the civil rights movement in America. You have no idea what Stalin did for humanity. The civil rights movement brought to you by Stalin. The labor movement, the 8-hour workday, unemployment insurance, minimum wage, brought to you by Stalin. Space travel, brought to you by Stalin. The defeat of the Nazis in World War II, brought to you by Stalin. Russia becoming an industrial superpower and lifting up its head, brought to you by Stalin. China eventually developing socialism itself, brought to you by Stalin. Who do you think gave military training to Mao? Who do you think gave military training to Chiang Kai-shek? Who do you think set up a military training school and brought all kinds of Chinese people there? Who do you think sent all kinds of aid to Dr. Sun Yat-sen and provided military training? You have no idea what Stalin accomplished. There are few human beings in history who have done anything near what Joseph Stalin has done. This seminary school dropout from Georgia, this sentimental kid who wrote poems about poetry, about playing the lute, this is somebody who's changed history in ways we can't even imagine. You have no idea. There is a reason that you're kind of allowed to maybe like Lenin, that you're allowed to read Marx to be edgy, but you can't touch Stalin with a 10-foot pole. They do everything. Stalin was evil. He was worse than Hitler, blah, 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 blah. There's a reason. There is a reason. There's a reason they don't want you to know about this man. There is a reason they don't want you to know about this man. This man was an organizer. This man built a mass movement. And he led so many people to lift their heads. Folks, when Hitler was defeated and the Nazis were defeated, what was the picture that signified the Nazis defeated? What was the picture? I'm going to put it up on here. This is the picture that went all over the world to let the world know. The iconic photograph that told the world that World War II was over. This is the iconic photograph that let humanity know that VE Day, victory in Europe, had arrived. What flag is that? What army is that? Take a look at that picture. Just look at that picture for a few minutes. Just reflect on it for a few minutes. I'm not even going to say anything. I'm going to be silent in memory of all the people who died, all the people who sacrificed, and all the lies we've been told about the great heroes of that time. Think about how the American government is currently spending billions of our dollars to arm people who tear down monuments to that great moment. Just think about that. Just think about it. But my point tonight is not just to go on about all of Stalin's great achievements, right? First of all, if we're going to be scientific, we have to admit that a lot of bad things happened on Stalin's watch also. There's no way around that. A lot of people went to gulags who didn't belong there. A lot of innocent people got rounded up during the 1937 Great Terror, the Yezhov-Shina. A lot of innocent people got rounded up and sent to labor prison camps. It was really bad. There was mass fear among the population. There was kind of a hysterical fear of Nazi spies. People were turning each other in. Neighbors were turning in their neighbors. And it was a bad time. And a lot of very innocent people got hurt. So much so that eventually Yezhov, who was the head of the secret police, was executed by Stalin for his mismanagement, for the fact that so many innocent people had been hurt. So, we know that 1936, 1937, those were bad years in the Soviet Union. Bad years. Stalin was the leader at that time. That happened on his watch. And a lot of innocent people got hurt. So we can't pretend that that didn't happen. We can't pretend it was all good. No, a lot of innocent people got hurt, during the 1936-37 purges. So much so that Stalin gave the death penalty to the guy who was running the secret police. And we also know that during the early years of the USSR, they were barricaded. Medicine couldn't get in. Food couldn't get in. Millions of people had died in the Russian Civil War. And the Bolsheviks and the communists had to make decisions about who got to eat and who didn't. In 1932, there was a famine in Ukraine. During that famine, there was shortages of food. Not enough food was being produced. People went hungry. And Stalin sent the military into Ukraine. The kulaks, the wealthy peasants, they were hoarding their grain. And so Stalin sent the military in to forcibly collectivize the farms, to take that grain away from the kulaks. And they didn't have enough food for everybody. And people starved, and Stalin had to decide who got the food and who didn't. And we can't imagine these kinds of circumstances. And at a time when people were starving, the Soviet Union had to export grain so they could buy tractors to make sure that no famine like this ever happened again. You know, people say, well, that's genocidal. It's genocidal, right? That he exported grain while people were starving. Well, you kind of got a point, except he was doing it so they could buy tractors to make sure they never had a famine again. Can you imagine these kinds of decisions? I can't. I could never imagine making these kinds of decisions. You're sitting there in a country where people don't have enough food, and you're sitting there trying to decide. You decide who dies and who lives. Right? We've only got this much food. If we make the decision, this many people will starve to death. If we make this decision, this many people will starve to death. Right? We have no idea what we would do under these circumstances. We can't relate in any way. And my point here tonight is not to tell you Stalin did everything right. I don't know that. I can point to the amazing achievements that happened that no one ever talks about, like raising a whole country up from nothing, like defeating the Nazis, like industrializing, like supporting the civil rights movement and the labor movement in America, building a global anti-fascist united front. I can talk about all these amazing achievements no one ever talks about, but that doesn't mean I can't acknowledge that some things were done badly. No. That doesn't mean I can't acknowledge that the conditions these people were facing were nothing like what we in the West can ever imagine. I can't deny that. I'm not sitting here trying to pretend that Stalin didn't have to make some decisions that hurt people. I'm not sitting here pretending Stalin didn't order a lot of people to be executed. But I'm telling you that the way we've been taught to think about Stalin, the way we've been taught to equate him with the Nazis with whom he defeated, the way all of his great achievements are conveniently ignored in all your college history classes and on the book, the history bookshelf at Barnes and Noble. There's a reason for that. There's a reason they're way more scared of him and anyone who admires him than they are of Trotskyites, anarchists. And this is important. We can't relate. We can't relate to the conditions these people were in. We can't. And you'd like to think that you would have done a better job. You'd like to think that you would have allowed more freedom to exist in the USSR at these times. 15 different countries invaded them right after the Russian Revolution. Barricades to prevent food and medicine from getting in. People are starving and hungry, and the country is completely militarized in order to hold it together. You like to think that you would have said, well, let's make sure everyone has their freedom of speech under these circumstances. Oh, you'd like to say that, wouldn't you? You'd like to say that during World War II, when 27 million people are being killed, when 1 in 7 people in the Soviet Union is dying, that you would have never moved people around on the basis of their nationality. Oh, no, you wouldn't have moved the Chechens out of the area to crush the pro-Nazi Chechen insurgency. You wouldn't have deported people from one region to another on the basis of their race in order to win the war. You never would have done that. Well, good for you. I'm proud of you. But we don't know the circumstances that the USSR was facing during these years, the conditions that people were living in, the amount of straight up killing they were facing at the hands of a hated enemy, the high cost decisions they had to make that had dramatic consequences for lots of people. You can't relate to that. All you can do is say that the fact that out of the nightmare that was thrust onto the people of Russia and the surrounding countries, out of the nightmare of World War I and the Russian Civil War and famine and blockade and starvation, we got miracles. We got untold miracles. We got a whole country rising up from poverty. We got the music of the music of Shostakovich. We got the films of Sergei Eisenstein. We got a modern steel manufacturing industry. We got huge power plants. We got modern universities. What they accomplished in horrendous circumstances should blow your mind. What they were able to do, despite everything that they were up against, should blow your mind. Anyone who tries to tell you that socialism never worked anywhere, socialism failed everywhere, does not know what the hell they are talking about. But the only reason this is relevant in what I'm telling you right now, right? Anybody can make a YouTube video or a Rumble stream or a Rockfin, giving a blowjob to Stalin on the internet. Anyone can do that. And historical arguments don't matter, okay? I'm not here to win a historical debate. Leave that to Grover Furr. Grover Furr, he's done a lot of great historical research. His book debunking Timothy Snyder, Blood Lies, is a tremendous book. I hope people go and read it. I don't necessarily agree with everything Grover has said, but I love his work. I recommend it. I've got Grover Furr's books right over here. Grover Furr, Khrushchev Lied. Great book. I'm a Grover Furr fan if there ever was one. Okay. I'm a Grover Furr fan if there ever was one. Huge fan of Grover Furr. Admire his work. Don't always agree with necessarily everything, but he's tremendous. Grover is absolutely tremendous. It's only so many hands. But anyway, Grover is absolutely tremendous. But the reason that this matters, the reason all of this matters, is because Stalin was an organizer. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Stalin was an organizer. Stalin was an organizer. He organized that book smuggling club with his classmates at the seminary school. He organized oil workers to go on strike. He was the editor of Pravda, the agitational daily newspaper. Stalin was an organizer. Stalin built a movement. A movement. A movement demanding peace, land, and bread. A movement demanding healthcare and jobs and education. Stalin built a movement. I'm going to tell you two personal stories about me and my experience in a movement and why we need a movement so badly. Story number one is this. When I was 15 years old, I found out about a discussion at a communist bookstore in Cleveland, Ohio. My mother and brother were driving to Cleveland, so they agreed to drop me off. And I went to a discussion at the communist bookstore. It was a discussion about the war in Iraq, Bush, something like that. But then after the discussion, I'll never forget, one of the communist organizers at the bookstore handed me a stack of newspapers. He said, "We're going to go out and sell the paper." And I said, wait a second. Hold up. You want me to go out and walk up to people I don't know and try to get them to pay me actual money for a newspaper about communism? And they said, yep, we do it all the time. We're going to go out and sell the paper. And I was like, no, I can't do that. And they're like, no, we do it all the time. 15-year-old Caleb Maupin in my Letterman's jacket. 15-year-old Caleb Maupin, who was shy. 15-year-old Caleb Maupin, whose family had told him to not talk to people about politics, that I was an embarrassment with all of my belief in communism. 15-year-old me went out on the streets of Cleveland Heights, Coventry neighborhood, and sold newspapers to people on the street. And it saved my life. I would be dead right now if that had not happened. And I'm dead serious about that. If they had not taught me to sell newspapers, if they had not taught me to get out of my shell, if they had taught me to not be a shy person, if they had not taught me how to interact with people, I would be dead right now. I'm not going to get into my personal life. Too much of my personal life's all over the internet anyway. I'm not going to tell you why, but I can guarantee you, if that day had not happened, I would be dead. They saved my life. I'm not joking. I'm not being hyperbolic. That saved my life. And you know what that is? Going out on the street and talking to people you don't know about communism, that's called organizing. That's called building a movement. And that's what Stalin was all about. He wasn't great because he understood history better than everybody else. He wasn't great because he could, debate people. He wasn't a debate bro. Stalin wasn't great because he wrote the best books. Stalin was a great organizer. Stalin could sell newspapers better than anybody. He was the editor of Pravda, the daily newspaper. And organizing is what has brought me true happiness in this life. And it's why I am where I am. I'm sitting to you in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I'm sitting in my lovely Brooklyn apartment right now. I would not have this life if it wasn't for that moment. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand what a movement can do for you. People say, oh, it sounds like so much work. It just sounds like Caleb, I don't want to listen to you. You're always saying we got to go do stuff. Why can't I just watch Jackson Stinkle? Jackson will get on there and call people faggots and I can laugh about it and it'll be funny. And then I can just go on with my life. Why do I have to listen to you? You're always telling us we got to do stuff. You're trying to build an organization. That sounds like a cult. That sounds like a cult. I just want to sit in my room and be mad and call people faggots and feel like I'm smarter than everybody. I don't want to go build a movement. Why are you always doing that, Caleb? Why do you always got to ruin everything? I was having fun when you were talking about Stalin, but now you're trying to tell me I got to build a movement. Why are you doing that? Why do you have to ruin everything, Caleb? Why do you have to build a movement? Why are you doing that? Well, I'm doing that because it's the truth. It's not what's going to make me popular. It's not what people want to hear. It's what they need to hear. And I walk through the streets of this city and I see the people and I see the homeless people, I see the next generation stuck in their phones, hopeless, miserable, and lonely, and I know what we need. We need a mass movement. We need a mass movement to stop the war. We need a mass movement to stop World War III. We need a mass movement to stop the low-wage police state. We need a mass movement to rebuild our communities. We need a mass movement to rebuild this country, the highways and bridges, but we also need a mass movement to save the soul of America. Too many people are broken. Too many people are left behind. Too many people are hopeless. Too many people are in pain and agony, and they need a movement. They need a movement. Just like I needed a movement. They need a movement. This country needs a movement. The neighborhoods need a movement. The world needs a movement. And there are many people who need a movement. They need a movement. They need a movement. Whether it's popular or not, whether it puts me in danger or not, I'm going to give them a movement. I'm going to give them a movement. I am going to do my damnedest. I am going to do my best to give them a movement. Because what this country urgently needs is a movement. We need a movement. We urgently need a movement. There's no substitute for a movement. Nothing online is going to solve this. Nothing from some other corner of the world is going to come and rescue us. There's not going to be a savior from the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. We need a movement. We need a movement. We need a movement. We need a movement. And a movement involves a lot more risk than just talking on the internet. And a movement puts you in a lot more danger. And a movement isn't easy. And a movement involves making mistakes. Involves people letting you down. A movement involves sacrifice, risk, involves people getting arrested, involves people going to prison. You think Stalin didn't go to prison? There's nothing but a movement that's going to save us. Not a woke hashtag, not anti-woke resentment, a movement. We need a movement. Now, I told you all about Carl Geiser. Told you about how in my little town in Ohio, I went on the internet to see if there'd ever been another communist. I found out the story of Carl Geiser, who went and fought in Spain. I'm going to tell you another story. First time I ever went to New York City, I was a senior in high school. I was 18, so my parents couldn't stop me. Me and my high school buddy, we got on the bus. The Quakers, the American Friends Service Committee, had chartered a bus to go to a big anti-war protest in Cleveland, or in New York City, from Cleveland. Me and my high school friend, we were about to graduate from high school. It was April. We got on the bus and we went to New York City to attend a big anti-war protest. It was huge. 2005, 2006. Big, huge anti-war rally against the U.S. war in Iraq. Thousands of people, traditional Korean drummers, marching bands, anarchists, socialists, communists, you name it. It was a big gathering. We marched. I'd never been to the city before, I'll tell you that much. I had never been to New York City. But we got dropped off at one spot. And we waited and waited and waited and waited until it was our turn to march. And then we started marching down Broadway until we finally got to the end of the march. There were 9/11 Truth people there trying to talk to us, and all kinds of people handing out newspapers. A lot of older folks on every corner. This was a long time ago, 2005. Every corner there seemed to be an older person with a New York accent. Get a copy of the working class newspaper. Capitalism is the problem. Socialism is the answer. A lot of older folks with New York accents. Every Trotskyite group you ever heard of. Maoists, Enver Hoxhaites, anarchists, social democrats. Every corner practically had a different communist group trying to hand out literature to us. And we're walking down the street. We're walking down the street towards the end of the march. Toward the very end of the march, as we're reaching the very end, saw 5 or 6 old men in wheelchairs. Said veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade against the war in Iraq. Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. There weren't many of them left. In 2005, when I was a high school student, I saw veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Old men who, when they were my age, when they were 18 years old, had gone and fought in Spain against fascism. I walked past the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade against the war in Iraq. When they were 18, they'd been marching with guns on their shoulder in Spain. And now in their 80s, they were sitting there in their wheelchairs watching a march go by against the war in Iraq. That is a mass movement. That's a movement. That's a movement. And that's what we're keeping alive. That's what we're keeping alive. And that's why I won't be wokeified. I'm not going to trade Stalin for Judith Butler, Marilyn Fry. I'm not going to let Jabba the Vosh equate Stalin with Hitler. And I'm not going to support U.S. imperialism against China and against Russia. And I'm never going to turn against the Cuban people or the Korean people. I'm part of a movement. That movement is not a hashtag. That movement is not trendy. It's not woke. It's not a movement you join because you want to be popular. It's not a movement you join because you want everyone to like you. It's not a movement that you join because it's the cool, hip thing to do that everyone else is doing. It's a movement you join because you expect persecution. It's a movement you join because you know that you are on the right side of history. It's a movement that Stalin joined when he was 17 years old and wrote a beautiful poem about how the people don't want his truth, about the truth and beauty of music. It's a movement that Jesus Christ was nailed to the cross for leading. It's a movement that so many people have died to keep alive, and they have done everything they can to obscure and hide from us. There is a movement in human history that they have tried to hide from us. They've tried to kill this movement. They've tried to suppress this movement. They've tried to erase this movement from history, but this movement is alive, and it is alive in Eurasia. This movement is alive, and it's more alive than ever before. This movement is on the battlefields of Donbass right now. This movement is guarding the demilitarized zone and refusing to back down on the Korean Peninsula right now. This movement controls the island of Cuba. This movement leads Venezuela and has led them to resist hell and high water. This movement has seized control of Nicaragua. This movement made China into a superpower. This movement led Iran to break the chains of imperialism and join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and raise itself up. This movement turned Syria into an industrial country. This movement brought running water and electricity to Libya and built the great man-made river, the world's largest irrigation project. This movement took the land of the wealthy white farmers of Zimbabwe and redistributed it to the African people. This movement built the great Aswan Dam in Egypt. This movement built the Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroelectrical power plant in the world in China. This movement has constructed Huawei Technologies, the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. This movement saved humanity from Hitler. This movement ended the Vietnam War and led the Vietnamese people to break their chains and raise their people up from poverty, an economic miracle, the socialist-oriented market economy of Vietnam. This movement defeated apartheid in South Africa. It freed Nelson Mandela from his jail cell and made him the president of a free South Africa. This movement liberated Angola and built Luanda, the capital city. Gave so many people in this impoverished African country their first job. This movement that they're celebrating right now in Russia, they're having the Russia-China Festival, celebrating the long history of cooperation between the Russian people and the people of Africa. This movement has changed the world. It has drastically changed the world. No one has changed the world the way our movement has. We have done amazing things. We have performed miracles. We should not be ashamed to be communists. We should be proud to be communists. We have done unprecedented, amazing things, and we've learned from our mistakes. We've learned from our mistakes. We've corrected. We've adjusted. We've moved towards the 21st century. The leader of the Russian Communist Party is a Christian. Gennady Zyuganov has accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. We've admitted that the persecution of Christians that went on was wrong. We've admitted that Jesus was one of us, and that you can't build heaven on earth without God. We've admitted that our atheism and our anti-clericalism was a mistake. We've admitted that atheism unleashed into the world some of the most evil Satanism we've ever seen. Ayn Rand, Friedrich Nietzsche. We've learned from our mistakes. We've learned, we've adjusted. We've learned you need a market sector in a socialist society. We've learned that there's room for private businesses and private enterprise and socialism. We've learned that there are things that have been done wrong in the history of our movement. We don't deny that. We've adjusted. We've corrected. We've modernized. And if we've learned anything, it's that wokeism and the Democrats are not our friends. You can't be woke and be part of this movement. Wokeism are the foot soldiers of imperialism. Wokeism, degrowth, identity politics, this is the new face of the enemy. They may claim to speak in the name of socialism, but what they practice is fascism. What they practice is the extreme opposite of what Xi Jinping stands for, what Fidel Castro stood for. They may speak in the name of our movement, but they're liars. Wokeism is the main danger at this point. Wokeism wants to kill us. Conservatives don't know what they're talking about. They think Joe Biden's a communist. I'd hate communism too if I thought Joe Biden was a communist. Fuck. But our movement is alive. The problem is it's not here in America. The Communist Party is a woke, Democratic Party piece of crap. The only organization in America that has decided it is necessary to go out and build a movement in these times, to build this movement within American shores, is the Center for Political Innovation. We are the only organization that is building this movement. There are others who work with us. The Party of Communists, they do great work, great work, and they teach Marxist theory, and they have online conferences, and they do great work, and they have connections in the international communist movement. They deserve credit. The Schiller Institute, they're not communists. They reject Marxism, but they defend China. They're building anti-war rallies. They are to be commended. We're not the only people doing good work, but we are the only expression of this movement in America right now. We're the only people even trying to build a movement. We're not giving up. There's a reason that they have thrown so much feces at us. It's because what we are doing, we are continuing the legacy of Joseph Stalin. We are continuing the legacy of Carl Geiser. We are continuing the legacy of William Z. Foster and Gus Hall. We are keeping the flame of this movement alive. And that's why they've thrown so much garbage at us. We represent what has taken power in China. We represent what has taken power in Donbass. We represent what has taken power in Nicaragua and Venezuela and Cuba. We represent what has liberated Iran. We represent what was destroyed when Libya was destroyed, when Gaddafi, the great African leader, was murdered. We represent what's fighting Saudi Arabia in Yemen. We represent the forces of resistance. We are the resistance. And our message is that the American people should align with the people of the world against the imperialists, and that it is urgent that we build an anti-monopoly coalition right here in the center of the United States, that our real enemy is at home. That is what we're doing. That is our message. We are anti-imperialists. In our bones, we are anti-imperialists. We are anti-imperialists. So if you want to get involved in building a movement, sign up. We could use you. We'll put you to work. There's plenty of work to be done. We could use you to help us build a movement. Join the Center for Political Innovation. Got a campaign coming up in Portland. Not exactly sure what it's going to look like. Some proposals are on the table. Different ideas are floating around there. We're doing something in Portland this fall. I don't know when exactly. I don't know what exactly, but it's looking like we're going to do something. We're trying to figure out the details. We're going to have a presence at the protests on August 6th with other groups. We're building a movement. We need a movement. And everything I told you about Stalin, was what Stalin did because he was the leader of a movement. So there we go. There we go. That's what I've got for you. Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. And on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Now, it's interesting. We got 137 people watching on YouTube, and we got 6 people watching on Rockfin, and we got 26 people watching on Rumble. So I will call people out on all of those venues, right? So I can only put YouTube people on the screen because that's how StreamYard works. We got Gabby Hernandez. We got Gabby Hernandez in Chicago. We got Justin Rivera in Riverside. We got Dionysus Larson in Greece. We got Kendall in San Diego, Isaac in Vancouver, Canada, John McCarthy in Chicago, Scott in Miami, John Whitty in Houston, Temple City, California. And, anyone put in the chat where you're from, and I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. All right. We got Killian in Milwaukee. We got San Fernando Valley, Richard Sawaki, Neil Frazier in Hong Kong, Klaus in Germany, Mark in Utica, New York, Patch in Arizona, David Fox in Bendigo, Australia. We got Mitchell Sparks in Pittsburgh, Klaus Kinski in Germany. We got Alex from Brazil, Bob Troy in New York, Chester in England, Jamie, who's about to join the Center for Political Innovation. Jamie's in St. Paul, Minnesota. Welcome, Jamie. Names and locations. Oh, we got Ryan in Kansas City is watching on Rumble. And if you're watching on Rumble, Rumble is just as much part of this as anybody. Ryan Clark in Kansas City is watching on the Rumble. We got Seasoned Noob in China, Sarah in Canada, Moonlight Beach in California, Micah in Las Vegas, Balthazar in Oakland, Seasoned Noob, Jonathan Mahari in Stockholm, Sweden. Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. Call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Anyone who's watching, no matter what platform you're on. If you're on Rockfin, I'll call you out. We got, Ellie Marino in Chicago is on the Rockfin. Welcome. Daniel J. in Michigan is also on the Rockfin. Welcome, Daniel J. All right. We got Rice from Adelaide, Australia. We got Chris in Salt Lake City. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Right. Yeah. Make sure you subscribe on any of the platforms you're on. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications bell. We know YouTube is messing with me on the notifications. So there we go. We got Ahmed from Egypt says Stalin is a legendary leader. Gonzalo from Argentina. Welcome, Gonzalo. There you go. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. Welcome. So I got a lot of super chats to answer, but that's good. And keep them rolling in. Now, the way this works, just for people that are watching, is so I am now entering the second half of our show, which is where I answer people's questions. So if you have a Rumble rant, send it to me and I'll put you on the list and I'll make sure of answering it. If you have a tip on the Rockfin, I got Daniel J's tip already. Laura in Houston is also watching on Rockfin. Shout out to you, Laura in Houston. You're watching on Rockfin. And I've got the super chats on YouTube. If you send me a tip or a Rumble rant or a super chat, I will do my best to give you an answer. Now we're way past 2 hours, but I'm going to keep going because I got to answer the questions. So the first question is, did you see Kynan's disruption of RFK for world peace? Tried to research Steve Hassan, and Google really loves this guy. Very good. All right. Very, very good. I will definitely answer that. But yeah. All right. Wrote it down. I haven't seen any video from the recent RFK disruption. I saw photographs of Jose, and I heard from other people. I know, like the woman who calls herself Blue Moon. Her name is Lucy Blue Moon. She was there, and other people were there. So, I think it's a great thing that happened. And I want to see the video. I haven't seen it. I know that a lot of people are really angry about RFK's support for Israel. I'm one of those people, right? Israel is an evil settler colonial project. Zionism is an insult to the great legacy of Jewish people. Jewish people have been on the vanguard of so many struggles for social justice over the years, and to see Jewish people and their great history of struggle against injustice equated with the crimes of an evil settler colonial state that has murdered Palestinians and is founded on racism and Jewish supremacism, that is not good, right? And that we can oppose bigotry or ethnic bigotry against Jews, anti-Semitism, while at the same time, supporting the opposition to Zionism, right, and opposing Israel. So I'm with the people that are critical. But that said, RFK, despite his bad position on Israel, is playing a very good role, right? I mean, he's saying things about Ukraine that no one else will say. He's challenging the medical industrial complex and the manipulation of social media by the tech giants and big pharma. And so I respect RFK in other ways. And I don't think that just because he's wrong about Israel, we should just, call him out, right? I'm not one who sees RFK as like the enemy. I think it's complicated, right? And that, when it comes to Israel, he's just wrong. I mean, and the stuff he says about Israel, and he says things like Israel doesn't kill children. I think they do. I've seen some video, but at the same time, I don't think RFK should be treated as the enemy. And so, CPI, we don't endorse any candidate, right? We are a nonprofit. We don't run in elections. We don't endorse any candidate. As far as we're concerned, RFK is just another one of the candidates, but we want to educate as an educational organization. We want to educate RFK supporters about everything I just told you about on this stream. So, if we just run in there with our middle fingers up, fuck you, RFK, you Zionist turd, we're not going to win any of them. That said, we can't betray our Palestinian brothers, right? We can't betray the people of the Middle East, the Muslims of the world, and just pretend that's not an issue. What he says about Israel is hideous, and he needs to be called out for that. So it's a nuanced situation. And, we're not in a position to endorse any candidate or support any candidate. But that said, we want RFK's supporters to join CPI. That's what we want, right? As far as we're concerned. Now, there's different organizations people work with. What we want is RFK supporters to read CPI literature, come to CPI events, and join the peace movement that we're building. That's what we want. So, we were not represented at that event, I don't think, but I'm curious to see what happened. And I know that different people have different positions, so I'm going to have to see the video. Maybe I can show it on a future stream. But there you go. All righty. All right. Oh, and here's the video. So now that I have the video, right, I can just, let me see if I can cut and paste it, right? Oh, here I can just, so now I can show the video, right? I'm seeing this with fresh eyes. So hold on, everybody. We can just watch the video, right? Since he sent it, why not? Just watch the video. It's unlisted. Wow, you're sending me a secret link. You're showing me a secret link. This is an unlisted video you just sent me, John, but that's okay. I'm going to show it on the stream. Anyhow. All righty. So I'm downloading that clip. While that clip is downloading, we can answer the next question, but we'll show that video. And thank you, John, for sending that. But there we go. So the next question is from Daniel J. Is the future humans doing hard labor on minimum wage while robots write poetry and paint? No, it's not. The future is the robots and the whole means of production being taken over by society and forced to work in the interests of society overall. That's the future. The future is the banks, factories, and industries being seized by the broad masses of people and organized to work in the interests of society overall. And artificial intelligence makes that a necessity. The problem of poverty created by abundance, the irrationality of the capitalist system, means we really have to fulfill Marxism. And this is what Marx spent all of his time writing about, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Marx spent his whole career writing about these very things. And if you read The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Peary, if you read Low Wage Capitalism by Fred Goldstein, or you read the first chapter of my new book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. If you read this, you will see why socialism is a necessity to deal with the problems created by artificial intelligence. Marx wrote about workers' competition with machines, poverty created by abundancy, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, but no one talks about this now but I'm talking about it. And if you have artificial intelligence, you have to talk about this. This brings to the front the built-in problem of capitalism. Technology is great. We're not anti-growth. We're not anti-technology. We're against the irrationality of a capitalist system look, self-driving cars would be a great thing in a rational society. It's only because of capitalism that self-driving cars would lead to mass hunger. Artificial intelligence is great. It would serve humanity, make the world a better place. But under capitalism, where human beings' only value is their ability to sell themselves to a boss, it leads to big problems, right? We need socialism. AI points to the need for socialism. Okay, so now we're going to show the clip of Kynan. I am seeing this with fresh eyes. So, we'll see how this goes, right? Thank you for sharing this. I have not seen this. So thanks, John McCarthy. Here we go.
My question is on the topic of nuclear war, which you've addressed very well in your commencement address, which I think was one of the most important speeches given by a candidate. I'm personally an organizer for an organization called the International Peace Coalition. We've been organizing peace organizations across the world to really unite against this threat of nuclear war, and we really have to bridge the gap, as you said, because it no longer matters what our ideologies may be, what our particular beliefs are. Humanity is on the brink of annihilation, and we need to unite on that matter, no matter what.
But we need a question, please.
I'm getting to it. Thank you. But because Kennedy, you talked about his American University speech, I think is probably one of the most important speeches. We need a peace that's not for the grave, but a peace where all our families, everyone can cherish. And I want you to talk about that, and I really want you to endorse what we're doing with this peace coalition. And Helga Zepp-LaRouche, she was the one who organized this.
We need a question, please.
She's calling for a durable security architecture among all the nations of the world. So I would like you to endorse that, and I'd like you to talk about the American University speech.
Well, first of all, I love what you said. Thank you for everything that you said.
Thank you.
And thank you for advocating for that, because it's so critical right now. I mean, we're in a potentially existential battle with Russia. I mean, the U.S. is now is effectively at war with Russia. It's a nuclear power, and they have 1,000 more nuclear weapons than we do. And nobody seems to be caring about this. So, I love what you said. My uncle, in that speech, which I agree was one of the most important speeches in American history, he had negotiated secretly a nuclear test ban treaty with Khrushchev. My uncle and Khrushchev had developed this extraordinary friendship with each other where they could talk to each other on a hotline. Their State Department, their intelligence apparatus all wanted to go to war, but both of them had been to war. And Khrushchev had been at Stalingrad. The last thing he wanted was to go to war. And he recognized that he was a partner with my uncle. They wrote each other 26 secret letters. The first one was smuggled to, we had a Soviet spy who used to visit our house when I was a little boy. His name is Georgy Bolshakov. And he was and we loved him. The kid, me and my 10 brothers and sisters.
Damn.
He would play with us. He would do Cossack dancing.
Damn. Am I hearing this right? A Soviet spy used to visit his house?
He would climb ropes with my dad and do push-up contests. And he's a very charming guy. And it was cool for us because we knew he was a KGB spy and a GRU spy. And this was at a time when all the James Bond films were coming out.
Am I hearing this right?
So it was cool having a spy in our house. My uncle Khrushchev knew he couldn't trust the people, his military apparatus, and my uncle knew that he couldn't trust his. They began corresponding with each other, hiding their letters in the New York Times, which Georgy Bolshakov would fly back and forth from Moscow and give them. And they devised a plan to create the first nuclear weapons treaty of the nuclear age, which was a nuclear test ban treaty. And when my uncle and they negotiated it secretly, they kept the State Department, the CIA out of it, and when they got the treaty, the U.S. sympathy for that treaty was 80-20 against it. And the military was in rebellion against my uncle. The Senate and House, even the Democrats were all against it. And that speech was the beginning of turning the tide. And what he said something extraordinary to the American people. Because we had all been raised with this idea that we had won the war. You know, it was America who beat Hitler. And you know, we were watching shows like Vic Morrow and Combat on TV that showed Americans beating the Nazis and winning the war. And my uncle said, no, it was the Russians who won the war. The Russians, 1 out of every 7 Russians was killed. Hitler leveled a third of the country. He said, imagine if every city was reduced to rubble, every field burned, every forest burned between the East Coast and Chicago. That's what happened to Russia. And he said, we need to put ourselves into their shoes. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of our adversary. And it was the first time Americans had heard that, and they started thinking differently about it. And that 2 months later, that treaty passed. And, you know, I think it's important to think of today because nobody has talked to Putin for a year. We have no high-level relationship with Russia. We need to be talking to them. We need to do what my uncle said, which is to put ourselves in the shoes of our adversaries.
Wow. 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 Well, I think that pretty much speaks for itself. There you go. Thoughts on the Russia-Africa summit and the Niger coup? Well, the Russia-Africa summit, look, people don't know how deep the ties are between Russia and Africa. And I mean, I've seen it on the streets of New York City. You know, we had some protests when the war in Ukraine escalated, you know, marching through the streets of New York. Russia is not our enemy and stuff. And New York City, there's a lot of wealthy people and many Africans, not, you know, African Americans, but Africans were giving us thumbs up and supporting us. There's a lot of wealthy Africans who live in Manhattan. They agreed with us because of that longstanding relationship. And I've been to the World Conference of Parliamentarians in Russia, and I've been to the Yalta Economic Forum, and the amount of Africans there. Russia has an economic, you know, it's kind of like the Belt and Road, but it's called the Eurasian Economic Union, and many African countries are involved. And Russia's state-run industries are very involved Russia has a lot of state-run mining corporations that are working with African countries to develop their own state-run mining corporations. And Africa has a lot of natural gas, and Russia has a state-run natural gas company called Gazprom, and it's partnering with African countries to help develop their own natural gas resources. And there's a deep relationship between Russia and Africa. It's very, very deep. Zimbabwe. When I was at the World Festival of Youth and Students in Sochi, Russia, I remember that they had at that festival, Zimbabwe, had a very big, presence there. And they talked about how, with the help of China and Russia, one of the natural wonders of the world is something called Victoria Falls, right? And it's the world's largest waterfall. And it's in Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, it's from the period of British colonialism. It's named after Queen Victoria, but it's Victoria Falls, and it's in Zimbabwe. Well, with the help of Russia and China, there's now a hotel where you can stay, a luxury hotel near Victoria Falls. And for an impoverished African country like Zimbabwe, that actually makes a huge difference, to have tourists come and see Victoria Falls and stay at that hotel, right? And Russia has helped out Zimbabwe. Russia is very friendly with Angola. I have talked a lot about how they've targeted Isabel dos Santos, who is the leader of Angola. She's not currently the leader of Angola, but she was the head of their state-run oil company, and the U.S. government has persecuted her, and she's had to flee. And Biden's administration has an Interpol arrest warrant out for her. They call her a criminal. They want to drag her to the ICC. Isabel dos Santos was friendly to Russia and friendly to China. So, yeah, there's a deep relationship there. And of course, there's intrigue, and the coups and the divisions and the military stuff that goes on is related to that. The U.S. government doesn't want Africa-aligned governments, African governments to align with Russia. So I think you can fit the recent coup in with this ongoing intrigue and et cetera. So there we go. All right. What's up, buddy? I think you heard what's up. Been talking on here for a long time. How will art and music be different under socialism? Well, look, the problem with art in our society right now is that it is done almost entirely, at least for mass marketed stuff, for commercial purposes. It is done almost entirely for commercial purposes. And, art is about a lot more than entertainment and making money. Art, if you really look at it, art plays a role in every civilization. You go back to those, ancient Egypt, the pyramids, they were there. They weren't just there to bury people, and they weren't just there for religious purposes. They set the tone. Everyone in Egypt saw the pyramids. They saw the buildings, right? Music, right? The music of Beethoven, you go back to the way earlier, the music of Bach, right? This was commissioned. The kings, these kings would commission, composers to compose music because it was to make the country better. The artist historically has a responsibility to make society better with his art, right? That his job is to make his audience smarter, to make his audience learn something, to stimulate, to make the audience better. The artist is supposed to make the audience better with his art. That's the purpose of art. Nowadays, art is simply about making money. And so rather than trying to get your audience to be smarter and better with your art, often art is dumbed down to the lowest common denominator, something that's guaranteed to make a return on the investment, and that ruins art. Now, the Soviet Union, they invested, Soviet film was a massive industry. And George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, talked about how Soviet filmmakers had more freedom than American filmmakers did. It wasn't the government that was censoring them, the American filmmakers. It was the owners, the studios. They would tell them, what they had to produce. It was all done for marketing purposes. Whereas a Soviet filmmaker couldn't cross certain political lines, couldn't make films that were against the government. But other than the basic political controls, the artist had a lot more intellectual freedom, right? He could, show things, etc. He just wasn't allowed to make political statements that were against the communists. Whereas in America, there's not the political restrictions that you had in the Soviet Union, but there's all kinds of insane marketing restrictions, and people don't recognize that, right? And it's a similar situation in China, that socialist countries, they do tend to have more regulations in terms of politics, in terms of obscenity. Socialist countries tend to not allow sex in films, pornography, things like that. But at the same time, in terms of just, making a movie about whatever you want, actual film directors that get a budget from the state to make a movie, they're free to make whatever movie they want. They're not sitting down with the marketing team going over every point of the script to make sure that it makes money. I always like to quote to people. So the International, which is the anthem of international communism, right? The American English version, the Billy Bragg version. Oh my God. The Billy Bragg version is a crime against humanity, crime against nature. Billy Bragg, his rewrite of the International, I never want to hear those lyrics again. They're just so awful. But the standard American English version of the International, the second verse goes like this. The second verse goes like this. We want no condescending saviors to rule us from the judgment hall. We workers ask not for their favors. Let us consult for all to make the thieves give up their booty, to free the spirit from the cell. Each must themselves decide their duty. They must decide and do it well. Right? So, some archaic language there, but it says to make the thieves disgorge or give up their booty, right? It means, the thieves, it's like pirates, arg me booty. If you steal something, it's called booty, right? To make the thieves give up their booty, to free the spirit from the cell, right? That means unleashing human creativity. And, the goal is to create a world of so much abundance that labor becomes life's prime want, no longer a necessity. That's how Karl Marx defines the final stage of communism, as a world in which there is no division between mental and physical labor, and where labor becomes life's prime want. Well, if labor is life's prime want, meaning people work to entertain themselves, I think a lot of what people are going to be doing in communism, in the final stage of communism, is going to be artistic expression. Right? Because that is kind of where do intellectual work and physical work meet in art, right? A sculptor is both, right? He's doing physical labor, he's sculpting, and he's also doing intellectual labor. He's creating, and that the final goal of communism, I think almost every person will be an artist in communism. Art will be how people express themselves and entertain themselves. And there's going to be a level of artistic expression and intellectual depth in society like you've never seen. Because as technology eliminates, socially necessary labor, as much of that's done by machines, and the amount of labor that human beings have to expend in order to, create is constantly decreasing, and people have more and more free time, and labor becomes life's prime want and not a necessity. The labor that people do as their want to entertain themselves will be art. People are going to write books. People are going to paint paintings. People are going to sculpt. It's going to be different, right? That human beings will become much more artistic. We will free the spirit from the cell. That's a good question. All right. Free the spirit from the cell. All righty. Next question. All right. Now you're going to have to play a song about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Okay, I don't know songs specifically about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I know there are a number of songs about Spain and the international brigades to Spain. So let me see if I can find, the international brigades in Spain were called the 15th Brigade, Quince Brigada. So let me see if I can find, there's a song called Viva la Quince Brigada, right? Let me see if I can find that. Right. Okay. Yeah. Here. All right. So I'll put on, Viva la Quince Brigada. What's interesting is I'm going to play the song Viva la Quince Brigada, which is about the international volunteers who went to fight fascism in Spain. But it's not, there's another song in Spanish that was sung, and it was sung at like communist pioneer camps and stuff. It was in Spanish, and it was Viva la Quince Brigada, boom bada boom bada boom bala. Viva la Quince Brigada, boom bada boom bada boom bala. I'm not going to play that song because that song actually has a racist line in it, because many people don't know that many of Franco's soldiers were black, right? They were North Africans, and so unfortunately, for whatever reason, in Spain, a lot of the anti-fascist songs have anti-black lines in them, right? And it shows how confusing and weird all this stuff gets, right? But Franco had been a general in North Africa, right? And he'd recruited a lot of black North Africans to be his soldiers. And so when he was trying to set up a fascist dictatorship in Spain, he had a lot of black soldiers. And so that song that was sung at communist pioneer camps, it has a couple lines in Spanish about, Moors, and it's kind of race baiting, right? And many people don't realize that, that there was kind of, and that's one of the weird contradictions. Harry Haywood, who was a great black communist leader from the United States, he went and fought in Spain. He had a very bad experience because he was black, and people assumed he must be a fascist because there weren't black people in Spain in this time, and except for the mercenaries that were hired by Franco from North Africa. So it shows how, in America, the communists were fighting for the rights of black people, and they were fighting against fascism, and fascists historically have been very anti-black. But in Spain, because of a unique situation, there were a lot of black mercenaries who fought on the side of the fascists in the Spanish Civil War, right? Again, history is much more complicated than that. So anyway, I'm going to put on, and it's a thunderstorm in my area. I'm probably going to have to go shut my windows here. Can you hear the thunder? It just lightninged in my area. But I'm going to put on Viva la Quince Brigada, and I'll shut my windows while I do that. Right? Well, we'll do, right? Let me see. This is Christy Moore playing Viva la Quince Brigada, which is a beautiful song about the Spanish Civil War. So we'll put that on while I close my windows.
And 10 years before I saw the light of morn, a convict ship of heroes was laid. From every corner of the world came sailing the 15th International Brigade. They came to stand beside the Spanish people to try and stem the rising fascist tide. Franco's allies were the powerful and wealthy. Frank Ryan's men came from the other side. Even the olives were bleeding as the battle for Madrid had thundered on. Truth and love against the force of evil, brotherhood against the fascist love. Viva la Quinta Brigada, no passer on the pledge that made him fight. Adelante is the crier on the hillside. Let us remember them tonight. Bob Hillard was a Church of Ireland pastor. From Killarney across the Pyrenees he came. From there he came a brave young Christian brother. Side by side they fought and died in Spain. And Tommy Woods at 17 died in Cordoba. With the Vienna he learned to hold the gun. From Dublin to the Via del Rio, where they fought and died beneath the Spanish sun. Viva la Quinta Brigada, no passer on the pledge that made him fight. Adelante is the crier on the hillside. Let us remember them tonight. When the Irishman heard the call of Franco, joined Hitler and Mussolini too. The propaganda from the pulpit and newspapers had O'Duffy to gather up his crew. And the word came from the church support the Nazis. Men at love they failed again. The bishops blessed the blue shirts down in Galway as they sailed beneath the swastika to Spain. Viva the King of the God. No pass around the pledge that made a fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us remember them. And the song is a tribute to Frank Riley, Kit Conway and Vinnie Cody too, Peter Daly, Charlie Reagan and Hugh Bonner. So many died and can but never fear. Danny Boyle, Leslie Brown and Charlie Dundee, Liam Tomlinson and Jim Straney from Short Strand, Jack Nelty, Tommy Patton and Frank Conroy, Jim Foley, Tony Fox and Dick O'Neill. Viva la Quinta Brigada. No pass around the pledge that they have found. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us remember them tonight. Viva la Quinta Brigada. Let us remember them tonight. Okay, we'll sing it. Viva la Quinta Brigada. Let us remember them tonight. Viva la Quinta Brigada. Let us remember them.
So there we go. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, played a song about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I love your analysis of the Pledge of Allegiance and would like you to share it. Is it clipped, or do you recall which streams you talked about? I talked about it on many, many different streams. The Pledge of Allegiance was taken from the oath that former Confederates had to take in order to get their voting rights back. In order to get their voting rights back, former Confederates in various states had to take oaths of loyalty to the United States. There are many different oaths, and then it was Francis Bellamy, who was a Baptist minister. He apparently worked for a flag company, and they had the idea to make an official Pledge of Allegiance. And it was part of selling flags to American schools. It was kind of a marketing gimmick. But Francis Bellamy was a Baptist minister who was a socialist, and he'd been banned from preaching in Boston because of his sermons that were, calling for the people to rise up against the rich and powerful. And so after he was banned from preaching in Boston, he moved to Florida. And then in Florida, he had a problem as well because he didn't believe in racial segregation. And so he would not have a segregated congregation. He wouldn't have a Jim Crow wire down the middle of his church. Now, he was very anti-Catholic. Apparently, he hated Catholics. He considered Catholicism to be un-American. And he was a little bit of a bigot against Catholics. He wasn't perfect. But his cousin was Edward Bellamy, who wrote a great utopian socialist novel that I've got a copy of somewhere, I think, right? I've got a copy of it somewhere over here. It's called Looking Backward. Somewhere around here, I've got a copy of Looking Backward, the utopian socialist novel. And Bellamy was a utopian socialist. And so, it's interesting, the history of the Pledge of Allegiance. The mass movement that was created, again, a movement, right? They built a movement. It was called the Nationalist Movement or the Bellamy Movement. And it was people that read the novels of Edward Bellamy about this future Christian socialist United States and wanted to put the ideas into practice, the Bellamy Movement. So there we go. All right, to back up what you're saying, theory and practice go together. Theory without practice is sterile. Practice without theory is futile. Absolutely. 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 You couldn't be more correct about that. You could not be more correct about that. And I mean, that's what we're doing. We're building a movement, right? You know, it's funny because I raised the slogan when I first started doing these streams. I kept repeating out of the movement to the masses. And I still think that's a good slogan because I meant out of the left to the masses. Because the left, that's what, you know, old hippies call the movement, right? The left is dead. I mean, the left is completely bankrupt, right? You know, the Democrats, the woke people, they are completely bankrupt. We don't want to recruit them. Communism needs to become what it is in most countries in the world, which is a mass movement of low-income people asserting their rights and fighting for justice. You know, that's what it is in most parts of the world. Here in the United States, it's this weird thing for intellectuals and middle-class people to think they're better than everybody else, and it's not helpful. We need a real socialist movement, but we need a movement. We need a movement now more than ever. We urgently need a movement, and I mean, it is urgent that we build a movement. I mean, we have to build a movement right now. We have to build a movement. I mean, there's no alternative. I mean, and look, the internet is rigged. The internet is completely rigged, and it's not going to save us. Only a movement is going to save us. We have to build a movement. So join the Center for Political Innovation. We're trying to build a movement. Stalin was great because he built a movement. This isn't an intellectual game. This isn't LARPing. The reason people's politics are so confused is because this is on the internet, right? We have to get to the masses of people, right? And that means we have to build a movement. And that's what I want to do. I'm for building a movement to stop the war, to save people's lives, to give people meaning, to raise this country up and rebuild it. We need a socialist movement. I am a movement builder. That's what I am. So there we go. All righty. Next question. Corporatism versus socialism and capitalism. Well, corporatism is the economic theory that was the basis for Italian fascism. The idea of corporatism is that instead of, you know, having the banks, factories, and industries become public property, they remain private property. But there is a corporate, which is a board that is set up by the state that governs every industry. And it has representatives of labor unions, it has representatives of the fascist government, and it has the owner of the company on it. And they negotiate government policy. It was a scheme to coordinate industry under Italian fascism. You know, and if you want to read, actually, there's actually a very good, you know, the lectures of Palmiro Togliatti, who was the leader of the Italian Communist Party during the reign of Mussolini. His lectures on the economics of Italian fascism are very good because Italian fascism was constantly changing. It did not have a set political model. And Palmiro Togliatti goes into great detail about that in this book. He shows that it was a very confused movement. It was an attempt to manage capitalism. Mussolini called his economic model. He said that Italian fascism was what he called super capitalism. Corporatism was super capitalism. And, you know, it's not socialism, it's super capitalism. It's like a managed capitalism. But, I mean, property relations never changed. It wasn't socialism. It was fascism. That's what they called it, fascism, the fascisti, right? That was the symbol of the Roman Empire. It's like the bundle of rods around an axe is the symbol of the Roman Empire. That was the name of the movement that Mussolini built. Corporatism is the economics of Italian fascism. Socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. State central planning. And corporatism is a form of capitalism. It's a heavily managed capitalism. But capitalism is any system where production is organized to make profit for private owners. So I hope that's helpful, Austin. All righty. So there we go. Tried to research Steve Hodson, and Google really loves the guy. Yeah, they do. Any book? Yes. So first thing you want to do, right? If you really want to, you know, you want the goods on Steve Hodson, type in Steve Hodson and Arthur Roussel, right? Type in, you know, and I'm just going to put this so you know how to spell it and everything, right? If you really want to know about Steve Hodson's maldoing, Google Steve Hodson, Arthur Roussel. That's the first thing you need to look for, right? Google Steve Hassan and Arthur Rosell. Arthur Rosell signed an affidavit. Now, this is not just a statement he made. It's not like an interview Arthur Rosell gave. Arthur Rosell signed an affidavit, meaning if he lied, he would go to prison. If they could debunk what Arthur Rosell said, Arthur Rosell would go to prison for perjury, right? If you do a signed affidavit, like a legal affidavit making a statement, that is on punishment of perjury. So it's a legal document by Arthur Rosell. Arthur Rosell, immediately what comes up, you will see what Steve Hassan did to Arthur Rosell and a number of different people. Arthur Rosell signed an affidavit about how he was held and tortured by Steve Hassan. Steve Hassan, the cult guru, who was the mentor to BreadTube, he held Arthur Rosell against his wishes. Arthur Rosell was a young man who had become a Scientologist, and Steve Hassan held him prisoner, according to a signed affidavit, a legal document that, again, if Steve could debunk this, he would have, and Arthur Rosell would have gone to jail. But it's a signed legal affidavit Arthur Rosell has filed that Steve Hassan held him prisoner in his own home and tortured him in order to try and get him to renounce Scientology, right? This is not denied, right? He's not the only person who has signed this affidavit. Has signed affidavits about Steve Hassan. And Steve Hassan actually admits that he was involved in what he called forcible deprogramming. Now, he says he doesn't believe in this any longer. He says he doesn't believe in forcible deprogramming anymore, but he was part of the forcible deprogramming movement. Boom, right? That's huge, right? So that there tells you. And then we have a signed affidavit from somebody who basically, under punishment of perjury, signed a document saying that Steve Hassan had tortured them, right? This man is a torturer, right? Unless Arthur Rosell is committing perjury and needs to go to jail, Steve Hassan tortured him. Now, one of Steve Hassan's close associates was Ted Patrick, and you can Google Ted Patrick. Ted Patrick is very famous, right? Ted Patrick was the guy who invented deprogramming. And Ted Patrick actually went to prison for deprogramming, right? Because Ted Patrick kidnapped a number of people, false imprisonment, torturing people, just doing everything he could to forcibly get people to change their religious beliefs. Right? 1980, Patrick was paid. I'm just reading from Wikipedia here, right? And you can go read Ted Patrick's Wikipedia page. Right? It's just classic, right? Just classic Wikipedia, right? This is Ted Patrick's Wikipedia page, right? And Wikipedia is, the deep state censors it like crazy. So if this got onto his Wikipedia page, this shows you how, it's just hard to cover it up. In 1980, Patrick was paid $27,000 to carry out the deprogramming of Susan Worth, a 35-year-old teacher who was living in San Francisco. Her parents objected to her involvement in leftist political activities. The process involved handcuffing her to her bed for 2 weeks and denying her food. So, a 35-year-old woman, not a child, 35, that's my age. She's a teacher in San Francisco. Got involved in leftist politics, so she became a communist, and her parents didn't like it. So they paid Ted Patrick, Steve Hassan's buddy, who he describes as a hero, paid Ted Patrick to handcuff her to a bed for 2 weeks and deny her food. Let that sink in, right? That's Steve Hassan praises Ted Patrick as a great anti-cult hero, right? Handcuffs this woman to a bed for 2 weeks because their parents objected to her getting involved in communist activism. Now, if that right there doesn't tell you everything you need to know about the deprogrammer movement, right? the parents didn't approve of her pending marriage and her involvement in leftist political activities. She was a high school teacher. They handcuffed her to a bed and deprived her of food. A 35-year-old English teacher in California, right? How do you do that and not go to prison? Right? That's a serious crime. And Ted Patrick eventually did go to prison for what he did, but Steve Hassan didn't. And that these deprogrammers, the anti-cult movement, they were called, they kidnapped, from what I understand, they kidnapped members of the Workers' World Party. They kidnapped members of the Communist Party. They kidnapped members of the Democratic Workers' Party, the Maoist group in San Francisco. They kidnapped members of the Revolutionary Communist Party. They also went after Scientology. They went and they kidnapped people. If you got involved in a political group or religious movement your parents didn't like or somebody didn't like, right? Your spouse didn't like it or whatever, they could pay you. You could pay these people, and they would grab you off the street, abduct you into a van, put a bag over your head, drag you somewhere to a basement, handcuff you to a bed, and hold you someplace until they changed your religious or political beliefs. Now, the only way they could get away with that is they had U.S. government protection. And Steve Hassan admits that his mentor is Robert J. Lifton, who is a U.S. military psychiatrist. He quotes him all the time. Oh, he loves, you know. I'm sorry to hear that, Jamie. I'll have to answer that when I get to you, but we'll get to it. So thank you. And it's really awful. If you really want to know, there's a beautiful, like, well-written essay in this book. Let me go get it. Right. All right. So this book, right, is called Inquisition. And it basically describes how it describes politics in the United States in the late 70s and how Reverend Sun Myung Moon went to federal prison. Now, Reverend Sun Myung Moon was this anti-communist pastor from Korea who was imprisoned because there was a fight between the Reagan administration that supported Park Chung-hee and the military dictatorship in South Korea and Jimmy Carter, who opposed it. They did the Koreagate investigations. And this book is very long. It's very long. It's a massive study. It's like an academic study of how Reverend Sun Myung Moon was sent to prison. It's a fascinating book. And there's a whole chapter called The Deprogramming Cult, right? And it goes into great detail about all of this. Page 419, right? And how it was like, in response, there was a fight going on in the ruling class, and a lot of these religious and political groups, a lot of the communist groups, a lot of the religious groups were being used by the ruling class. They were counter gangs, right? And that's in my book, right? And this book is in the citations in the bibliography of my book, right? In my book, chapter 3 is called Counter Gangs and Revolutionaries. And I talk about how different political organizations can play different roles. The ruling class sets up organizations to fight other organizations. I talk about Society of December 10th, and I talk about, that Marx talked about this mass movement that was created by Louis Bonaparte to set the stage for his military coup. And in chapter 3 of my book, Counter Gangs and Revolutionaries, I talk about these different groups. But in this book that specifically deals with how there was the Koreagate investigations, how Park Chung-hee, the dictator of South Korea, was trying to get his own nuclear weapons, which would then make U.S. troops leave South Korea, and how the Carter administration really hated Park Chung-hee because he was more independent. And so Reverend Sun Myung Moon was considered to be an agent of Park Chung-hee. And so they launched the Koreagate investigations and eventually imprisoned Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Jimmy Carter was against, was doing this, but the Reagan administration was more friendly. And, all of this is in this book. But if you read in this book in particular, there's a chapter called The Deprogrammer Cult, and it goes on for pages. Like, I am not doing it justice. There is so much there. There is so much there about these people and what they did. There are members of the LaRouche organization who I've spoken to who were kidnapped by Steve Hassan's people. Right? Steve Hassan was not directly involved, but it was the Cult Awareness Network. It was his group called CAN. The Cult Awareness Network, if you Google the Cult Awareness Network, if you want this kind of information. Cult Awareness Network. The Cult Awareness Network was eventually bankrupted by lawsuits because so many people had been kidnapped and sued them. You know, and it's a wild, wild story. So I encourage you to read about it. And, you know, it's interesting that this comes up a lot on these streams. You know, I don't know, maybe somebody thinks this is a gotcha, like Caleb's against anti-cult people. Well, look, I'll tell you, I was friendly with anti-cult people. I interviewed people that were involved in the anti-cult movement, you'll recall, right? Because many of these cults are right-wing and anti-communist. And I was interested in, you know, the CIA and the history of anti-communism. And I realized that a lot of the stuff they do at woke shops, right, is cult mind control, right? I mean, you know, the privilege walk, that is a thing that the wokes do at their workshops, was actually invented by reevaluation counseling, which is a split from Scientology. Michael Parenti's son, Christian Parenti, wrote a great article. So I was doing research into all of this. And it's those people, when I discovered that, you know, that Steve Hassan was behind BreadTube, and thank you, by the way, if you're watching, the person who gave me that information will remain anonymous. I'm not going to tell you who told me that, but I was tipped information. You know, Steve Hassan has hurt a lot of people over the years, right? I mean, Arthur Rosell and other people, there's a lot of people he's hurt over the years who closely monitor his behavior, right? You know, he's very carefully watched. Let me just put it that way, right? Who he talks to, who he associates with, and you know, he's very carefully watched. So, you know, he lives in the Boston area, right? And, you know, it's really not hard to find out his address. I'm not going to dox him here. I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything to him, but he's very carefully watched by a lot of people because he's hurt so many people, and he's obviously protected by American intelligence, right? I mean, you know, there's people protecting him. I mean, he has committed crime on so many levels, and he's a scam artist. You know, I mean, he's a scam artist in a lot of ways. And, you know, I could go into great detail about this, but anyway, when I found out that Steve Hassan was behind this, I started talking to the people that I'd talked to in the anti-cult movement about this. And they all said, oh yeah, we hate Steve Hassan too. What do you know? Right. And they were talking to me, and that was very odd. Right. I did an interview that I've since removed from this YouTube channel with one of these anti-cult people. And then right at the time that the Ukraine war escalated, all of a sudden they all just blocked me. And I thought, that's weird. Why did they all just block me? And I knew I found out later that's because they were moving in, right? And that they infiltrated my circles. You know, and I'm not going to get into the details. We've put it together. They infiltrated CPI, right? They infiltrated CPI. And we're pretty sure we know how this happened. All right. You know, they were upset about the BreadTube book, right? They were working for Steve Hassan. They were pretending they weren't, but they were in touch with Steve Hassan, and he has the money, and he's the big cult guru who's all over Netflix. And we've figured out how they connected it. And now we have like smoking gun proof. Like Dust James is going around telling people, oh, you got to talk to the ex-cult movement. I mean, he's basically in touch with these people, this network, right? Dust James is very open about it with people. There's other individuals who I will not name here who are in touch with this movement. And I can send you a screenshot. Right. This is great. You know, I am urging people to be very careful. Right. But this is classic. And I'm going to email this to myself. It's on my phone right now. Every so often I see something on social media that must be answered. That must be highlighted. I'm not trying to draw attention to the ex-members, right? And, you know, I appreciate Yankee Tanky has apologized, and I appreciate that, right? I appreciate that, and I appreciate his apology, but he's still not trusted. I mean, after that hit that was done on us, he's not trusted, you know, but, you know, I think this is one of the people who signed the document attacking me, who has since admitted that they lied in the document, has apologized for it, has said it was a Fed op, right? And if somebody, you know, he's admitted that, but I want to show you, this is something that Yankee Tanky tweeted out. So just, you know, again, take it or leave it, right? You can choose not to make anything of this. You can choose to pretend you didn't see this, but this pretty much says it all. This is from one of the signatories of the attack document against me. This is what he This is what he tweeted out. And I got a collection of tweets from various people admitting what's going on, right? I don't want to draw attention and rehash all of it, but I'll show this, right? Because this is just classic, right? This is one of the signatures. They spend all their time attacking you because they are paid. Just like the Medium article, that was a paid for attack. People were paid to do that. That's a confession. They were paid. This is one of the signatures. He signed it. And he admits this was paid work. And he didn't just say it in passing conversation. We have a tweet. The attack on me, the Medium article, was paid work. Who paid them? Well, it's people that are involved in Steve Hassan's network, right? We don't know exactly who. They did it in a very, in a way of, trying to maintain their transparency. But it's people that were part of this anti-cult network. They're the ones that did this, right? And it's because I exposed Steve Hassan. I exposed his relationship with BreadTube. And Steve Hassan is protected and in league with the American deep state. And that's why he's deprogramming the country in the aftermath of January 6th. And, this is a very sinister group of people. Now, they are the foot soldiers of liberalism, if there ever were such, and I could talk about this all night because they've, because they've attacked me. I have done a lot of research on these people. There's some classic stuff. There's a video where Steve Hassan is talking. He's speaking at a Jewish university. This is classic. He's speaking at a Jewish university. All right. He's speaking, to a group of Jewish, like yeshiva college students. And he said, I've been told to never criticize Orthodox Jewish organizations. I go to Israel and Israel supports me, and they've told me to never criticize Orthodox Jewish organizations. He just admits that. So he goes to Israel all the time. He is a Zionist. He's basically an Israeli agent. He should be arrested as a foreign agent because he's going to Israel and he's attacking groups almost exclusively that are critical and oppose Israel, right? And in addition to that, icing on the cake, Israel tells him not to go after certain groups. What does that tell you right there, right? He's getting instructions from the Mossad. Basically, he's going to Israel all the time, and they tell him don't touch certain groups that could be labeled cults. You want to talk about a grifter, you want to talk about a con artist, about a cynical, evil, manipulative person, and read the Arthur Rossell testimony, read what Ted Patrick did. These are evil people. This is evil. Everything they accuse these groups of doing, right? They accuse these groups of brainwashing people and all that. They forcibly grabbed people off the street into vans, held them against their will, handcuffed them to beds, and they got a free pass for it from the government, and the courts, protected them. And this is some evil shit. So there you go. That's, there you go. Read about the Cult Awareness Network, read about Ted Patrick, read about Steve Hassan, and ask yourself why. Why is Netflix making Ted Patrick into a hero? Why is Ted Patrick considered a hero? Right? Yeah. Why is Ted Patrick considered a hero on Netflix? Why are they trying to get us to like a guy like this? Right? Yeah. Why? These are some evil people, and they hate CPI. They look at CPI and they see the dedication and devotion that people have to this organization. They see how people need this in their lives, and they've targeted us, right? And they are going to continue to target us, right? I'm sure that they probably have a couple members in our organization at this time, right? There's probably, I don't know who they are, but we have an idea, and we're not going to do anything differently. We're not a cult. We don't operate in a cult-like manner. We're way too loose, honestly. We let anyone do whatever they want. You join on the website, you're a member, you come to all of our Zoom calls, and we don't have a secret. We don't have an initiation ritual. We're not, whatever. We're a very loose organization. We put on conferences. We publish books. We're trying to build an anti-imperialist movement in America. That said, they probably still have a couple people in the group, and that's fine, and we monitor the situation, and these are evil, dangerous people. So yeah, there you go. It's just something to be aware of. But anyway, I already played the Kynan video. What's my favorite Phil Oakes song? What is my favorite Phil Oakes song? I don't know. The first Phil Oakes song I ever heard was I Ain't a Marchin' Anymore. Right? That's always a fun one. Kind of goes over American history. I ain't a marchin' anymore. Right? There's the Cops of the World. It's kind of a mockery of the plundering nature of U.S. imperialism. There's the Draft Dodger Rag. That's kind of funny. Love Me, I'm a Liberal. That's a classic. I don't know what my favorite is. I'll just be honest with you. Some of them are very poetic. Some of them are very, very poetic, and some of them are humorous. Right. So there we go. All righty. All right, my beloved dog passed away. I'm really sorry to hear that, Jamie. I had her for 7 years. Wow. I have never had a dog, to tell you the truth. Now, my grandparents had a dog, and when they would come visit me, we would play with the dog. We loved the dog that my grandparents had. My grandparents from Missouri. They had an adorable little dog named Bug, and he was just a cute little dog that my grandparents took care of. He was very, very cute and adorable, but we never had a dog of our own. My mother was very, she just thought of animals as dirty, didn't want them in the house. And I've never had a pet, I never have had a pet of my own. But yeah, we loved our grandparents' dog. And when our grandparents' dog died, it was a very sad thing. Really sorry to hear you're going through that, Jamie. And I hope that you are able to mourn the loss of your dog. Different people are different ways with animals. Some people like cats, some people like dogs. I'm just not a pet person. It's hard to have a pet in New York City. People do. I see people have dogs, and I think you have to have a license, if I'm not mistaken, to have a dog in New York City. I could be wrong, but I think you have to have a license. But yeah. So there you go. Seen Hassan on TV a couple times. Yeah. Well, now you know. But there you go. So this is the first time we've ever been on Rumble. There's 21 people watching. There was like 26 watching. Some guy named Alex gave us the peace sign earlier. Thanks, Alex. And I think we're going to stay on the Rumble because, I've never streamed on Rumble before. And I've got, I got 26 people watching on Rumble. I'm going to stay on YouTube. I'm going to stay on YouTube until my last breath. They'd have to ban me to get me off of YouTube. Don't give them any ideas. But I'm staying on YouTube until my last breath. I'm not giving up YouTube because it's such a huge platform. But yeah, I don't see the point. What's the point what is the point of streaming on Facebook? We don't get anything out of it. I don't really get anything out of streaming on Facebook. So yeah. So, we'll keep going elsewhere. It's almost 2 a.m. here in New York City, but hey, we're going strong. This was a great stream. So yeah, couple things to remind people of. First things first. I've been meaning to mention this. How does one explain the relationship between Zionism and the deep state, from neoconservatism to CIA Mossad? What's behind it? Well, look, Zionism as a political movement, it was the arch enemy of Marxism, right? There was articles. Winston Churchill wrote an article, The Battle for the Soul of the Jewish People, Marxism versus Zionism. Zionism saw Marxism as its primary enemy, and Zionism was supported by the British Empire. The British Empire promoted Zionism so they could help, maintain their grip over the Middle East. And Zionism, the Balfour Declaration by the British Empire, the World Zionist Organization. Zionism is a British creation. It was the British Empire wanted to dominate the Middle East. Zionism was a useful tool for doing so. And so the British Empire did its best. One of the wealthiest families in Britain, one of the British imperialist families, is the Rothschilds. Now, there's many other British imperialist families that are not Jewish, but the Rothschilds, they were big. They hated Marxism. They were Jewish. They hated Marxism, and they were opposed to Marxism, and they wanted the British Empire to have a lot of influence in the Middle East. So Zionism was a movement they put a lot of money into. And that the British, they had the Balfour Declaration. They set up the settlements in Palestine, and it was about maintaining control of the British Empire over the Middle East. They set up an intelligence service, there's a whole history there. Mossad and British intelligence has kind of entered and, made itself very useful to American intelligence over the years. And the Mossad, because of World War II and anti-fascism, the Mossad was able to infiltrate the Soviet Union and give information to the American government about the Soviet Union. And you can read about Hank Greenspun, who was a very important newspaper tycoon and wealthy guy in Nevada, and how useful he was to the American deep state in the early years of the CIA. And, the Mossad and Israel has integrated itself very thoroughly in with the American intelligence community. That said, people who think that like there's this shady thing, the Israel lobby, it's not that simple, because Donald Trump was with one wing of the Israel lobby. He was with the Likudniks, with Netanyahu, with Sheldon Adelson, and those folks, what they want is very different than what other folks want, right? And that, like right now, there's a fight going on in Israel between two wings of the Israeli state, right? And that, Netanyahu and his allies are on one side, and Haganah, the Israeli Labor Party, other forces are on the other side. Israel, there's no the problem with a lot of people that want to get all conspiratorial is there's the Israel agenda. It's not that simple, right? Israel, yes, is a government that does have its own intelligence services, that does have its own foreign policy and its own agenda, but all Israelis don't agree on everything. And Israel has different allies in different wings of the deep state. And that this fight that's playing out all over the first world of the new right, which is the lower levels of capital, versus the globalists, which is the monopolies, the imperialists, the big monopolies, is playing out in Israel right now, right? The liberal Israelis tend to be loyal to, globalism, Joe Biden, etc. Whereas the lower levels of Israel, right, the more recent immigrants, the people in the settlements, they're loyal to Netanyahu, and they like Trump, they like the hard right. Israel's not like a shady conspiracy, right? Israel and Zionism. Israel is a state, right? Zionism is a global political movement to support that state. And within America, both sides support it, right? The Democrats and the Republicans, but they're aligned with different sides, right? The Netanyahu wing has one side, and the Haganah liberal wing has another side. Right. And that, Israel is part of Western imperialism, Western capitalism and imperialism. But, it has its own interests as well. And there's a push and pull. Right. These things are not that simple. And I always want to avoid any narrative that says there's some big grand plan, there's some big grand plot, some grand conspiracy. Right. You want to avoid that. Right. A lot of people think I'm anti-Semitic. I'm not anti-Semitic, right? I do not hate Jewish people. I am opposed to bigotry against anyone on the basis of their race, their religion, their ethnicity. No one should face discrimination. No one should be hated. No religious group should be scapegoated for it, for the world's problems, right? The problems are built into the system, right? And that a lot of times anti-Semitism is caveman logic, right? Him race have all money. Me race, kill him race, take him money. Me race. I mean, it's like caveman. I mean, it's dumb, right? And I'll tell you, if you read anti-Semitic literature, which I have, if you read anti-Semitic literature, it's dripping with anti-communism, right? Communism is the most evil thing that's ever existed. Oh, that takes courage to say, right? All the lies about Stalin, all the lies, and they then blame it on the Jews, right? So, and I talked on a previous stream, I talked about Jacob Schiff. They always try to say Jacob Schiff financed the Bolshevik Revolution. That's not true. I've debunked that many times. We don't do anti-Semitism here, but we also don't pander to Zionism, right? And that look, and there's soft Zionism too. And I can rant about that. That's a whole, it's been well over 3 hours. I'm not going to get into that on this stream. I've talked about it on many streams, but there is a huge amount of soft Zionism or liberal Zionism on the left. And I am sick of that. I have had it up to here with that. And, BreadTube, what they put out, there's a secret Nazi under every rock. Everyone who disagrees with the liberal order is actually a Nazi. That's liberal Zionism. That is liberal Zionism, right? It's Holocaust reductionism and it's liberal Zionism, right? And I'm against that, right? I am absolutely against that. People who think, Sophie from Mars did a video where I criticized Hannah Arendt and the way she framed the Holocaust by not blaming it on capitalism, blaming it on people, just saying people are evil deep down, right? And I criticize that. And Sophie from Mars says that proves I'm a Holocaust denier. How am I a Holocaust denier? I admit the Holocaust happened. I don't question any of the Holocaust at all, right? I think the Holocaust is a historical fact that's undisputable, right? But somehow, because I don't agree with the liberal interpretation that blames it on humanity, not capitalism, that rejects that fascism is the result of capitalism and decay, because I don't accept their anti-human narrative about why the Holocaust happened, I'm a Holocaust denier. I'm not a Holocaust denier. The Holocaust is an undisputed fact. It happened. End of story. But, and it shows you this is liberal Zionism, right? And that's a whole nother rant for a whole nother stream. I'll talk about liberal Zionism. Steve Hassan is a liberal Zionist, right? There's conservative Zionists too, though. I mean, the evangelical Christian right, and there's right-wing Zionism as well, right? It's complicated, but Zionism, Israel, it's part of Western imperialism, right? And it's a big part of it. And unfortunately, because of the history of anti-Semitism and because of demographics, the communist movement in America, what's left of it, at this point, it's basically non-existent. But the reason that wokeism was able to kind of take over and usurp American communism largely is because liberal Zionism was already there. There's a lot of liberal Zionism in communist circles in America. And that's a rant for another stream. I can talk about that on another stream. But anyway, folks, I am going to have to put on the closing music. It's been fun. I'll probably be back tomorrow night. Why not, right? You guys are my friends. It's summertime. It's hot outside, and I love you all. But anyway, before I go, I want to remind you all, every single morning on the CPI YouTube channel, every morning, we have a morning message from a different CPI member. So tomorrow there's going to be another one. It's going to be great. Every morning at 6 a.m. So start your day by going to the CPI YouTube channel. Start your day by going to the CPI YouTube channel and listening to our morning message. That's the way to start your day, right? If you want to start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism, go to the CPI YouTube channel, right? And listen to the morning message. It premieres every morning at 6 a.m. Right? That's how we start the day. We're spreading revolutionary hope and optimism. And so I urge you to go start your day, go subscribe to the CPI YouTube channel, go start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. All right, folks, I am going to put on the closing music and I am going to end this stream. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.